Yo, what's up guys, hope you guys are doing good. So today we are going to see what if Naruto got harem with Ruby Girls part 2. Hope you will enjoy this video, so before we start please like the video and subscribe to our channel and hit bell notification, it motivates me to upload more fanfics for my lovely audience. So let's get started. Nothing was impossible for a shni. Bit of a strange saying, that, but Naruto felt it held true all the same. Wealth, fame, power. As William Schnee, all was within his grasp. He had but to speak and his will would be obeyed 9 times out of 10, such was the weight of the Schnee family name. On the off chance that it wasn't, he could and often did, resort to more brutish methods in achieving his goals. It was for the good of the world, of course. Had he grown arrogant? Perhaps. But was it not the duty of a king to lead his people? Was it not their duty to build their lives up from the squalor, to lead them to a land filled with milk and honey? To be the shepherd they could flock to and not have to worry about the minor things that the world threw down before them? Likewise, did not the strong have a duty to shelter the weak and guide them down the path to power? Was that hypocritical of him? Maybe. An outsider would doubtlessly think so. Sometimes in those rare, fleeting moments before the dawn, he wondered if he'd gone insane. He hadn't been like this in his first life, you know. But where had being himself gotten him? Dying in the dirt, betrayed by the world, the people he loved, the one person he thought he could trust. No. Such thoughts were intrusive, painfully so, and he brushed them aside. Naruto Uzumaki hadn't truly given it his all before the end. As such, he died with regret. William Schnee would not make the same mistake, wouldn't ever remake such a mistake. He would be prepared. He would not be taken unawares. Best to focus on the present for the time being, and what a present it was. Weiss was coming along quite nicely, as expected of his precious saber, as were Winter and Willow. Conversely, little Whitley darling boy Must Protect was too young to truly understand the gradual shift in power that had taken place in the Schnee household. Perhaps that was for the best. Ah, how he longed to get out of this house. It was not enough to be powerful, he needed to have a purpose for that power. Jacques would be receiving his long-awaited humiliation soon, and while he looked forward to that, it would still be some time. Even a king could fall prey to boredom during that time, and he was no exception. Weiss was too young to understand his intent. She hadn't lived another life the way he had. Nor could he reasonably expect Winter and Willow, who while older, wouldn't understand his woes. Beacon would prove an excellent distraction in the coming years, but it was still so far away. And then he hit upon an idea. It was as bizarre as it was brilliant. Well, he had thought it after all, so why wouldn't it be? But only the best ones truly were. And besides, it wasn't as if anyone could stop him. Who cared if it was the middle of the day? He was feeling restless. No, beyond that, he needed to move. So he did. A quick call on his scroll put Pietro on the line. An equally brisk discussion followed. And then, he went for a walk. 0.0.0.0. They're out of control. Willow ignored Jacques as he ranted and raved before her. He paced to and fro like a caged grim, growling under his breath all the while. In all honesty, it was more than a little amusing. Why, it made her think of a fat white rat cornered by a pack of cats. Now there was a pleasant thought. His shadow looked small and pitiful before the hearth, an ugly, twisted thing, on the verge of being consumed by the roaring flames. Another amusing idea. No, more than amusing, perhaps. Temptation sank its claws into her. Jacques was not trained. He didn't have a semblance, nor aura for that matter. All it would take was a simple push and she could be well and truly rid of him. Do it. Her right hand twitched, conjuring a tiny glyph. Push him in. She stood slowly. Avenge the stain against your honor. Her eyes flashed. But if she killed him here and now, she knew how it would look to the authorities. Jacques would almost certainly die, but she would be the sole suspect. She would surely be arrested, and then where would her precious children be? Lost and alone without her. Well, William would probably be alright. He'd always been such a bold, brave boy, but Weiss, Winter, and little Whitley. I gave that boy everything. Jacques rounded on her before she could act on the impulse. And this is how he repays me. The nerve. The gall of it all. And where is Weiss? I believe she's paying a visit to General Ironwood. Willow hid a smile behind her glass as she drank. Not wine, of course, but he didn't know that, did he? She hadn't had a proper drink in years, now. Jacques made a strangled noise, reclaiming her attention once more. That girl. This is all your fault. You should have disciplined her better. And perhaps you, she set her glass down with a resounding clink, should have been a better father. His face turned an amusing shade of puce. You dare insult me, woman. His hand cracked out toward her face in a backhanded slap. It never made contact. Willow neatly snared his wrist with a glyph, entrapping his arm. He lashed out at her with his other hand, of course, to which she caught that as well. She'd enjoyed watching him squirm. But when he tried to turn that anger on her, she would not allow it. That said, my, how lovely. Now her husband had two perfect matching ice shackles, one to each wrist. His expression was truly one to behold. Willow would remember it until her dying day. That look of utter shock, the disbelief, the realization that the legacy of abuse her so-called husband had built his life upon was now so much ash in the wind, a castle of sand. No matter how hard he struggled, all was for naught. What are you doing? Release me at once, you Bjerg. His words warped into a tortured wail as she used her glyphs to wrench both arms behind his back. An epiphany struck. Ah, I see what William was on about. If I just use them my semblance this, then my glyphs should. Crack. Jacques recoiled with a yowl, broken slumping at his sides. Oh, dear. Bones weren't meant to bend that way. Perhaps he should seek medical attention. Jacques, dear. Her eyes met his. The next time you touch me will be the last time you have hands, she growled at him. She was sick and utterly tired of him and his desire to make himself the center of attention when he was no more than a sniveling pig. How had she ever let this little weasel of a man break her? It was utterly baffling, and to think he had nearly kept her broken. Were it not for her precocious boy, she'd have probably remained in such a sorry state. You're nothing, husband of mine. She leaned in, lips brushing the outer lobe of his ear. Our children could slaughter you in their sleep. Is that why you're so afraid? A whimper pushed past his lips. Was he afraid now? Too bad, so sad. How does it feel to be the powerless one this time around? She stalked out, laughter lingering, hips swinging. Jacques crumpled to his knees with a wail. 0.0.0.0. The streets of Atlas were cold as ever. Good. All this cold air cleared his head, if not necessarily his temper. Pietro insisted Penny was coming along nicely, but at the end of the day, he really didn't have much to show for his efforts just yet. Which was something of a shame really, given how much money he'd invested into the project. He was quite curious to face someone who could surpass human limits and leap into the realm of the gods. Might he finally have a worthy foe at last? Well, probably not, but it might be amusing to see what she would be like once her body and voice box were ready. Surely all that chakra and aura he'd given would be good for something. Unbidden, the man's words came back to him. Well, before he all but chased him out his shop. She'll be able to speak with you soon. I promise. Just give me a few more days. Promises, promises, Pietro. He clutched his white jacket closer to himself and kept walking. When will you deliver? He'd done wonderful work with Weiss and his weapons. Hers had the potential to level cities while his could destroy entire continents, maybe even the world if he wasn't careful. Ah, but Pietro Polendina wasn't just making a weapon now, was he? No, a daughter. Maybe that was why he didn't want to take any shortcuts. After all, Penny might not share his flesh and blood, but she'd been created from his very soul. There could be no closer bond. A daughter, eh? The thought was strangely stimulating. Maybe someday. He'd already picked out several names for a daughter. Power was far too on the nose, but pride sounded like a lovely name. Pride Royal Ivy. Yes, that's something any descendant of his would be proud to have, assuming he ever decided to forsake the Schnee name. On a whim, he followed that thread of thought and let it lead him away from the main thoroughfare. His legs carried him listlessly onward, leading him down an alley. What would she look like? A Schnee? Or would she have Uzumaki traits? He could see it now. A feisty, fiery redhead with long hair, violet eyes and cutting wit. She would be strong, she would be powerful, she would want for nothing. Quote. Exclamation mark. Quote. His sixth sense shrilled the briefest of warnings, heralding danger. He pivoted on one heel, then his attacker was upon him. Look out. Odd. Why were they yelling? He conjured a wall of glyphs between him and the approaching threat, only for a streak of motion to carry him off a nearby wall, bounce off him, then go tumbling back. A yelp filled the air and he moved on instinct. With one hand he caught them, with the other he spun them right round, dangling them upside down for good measure. In an instant, victory was his. Well, he sighed. What do you have to say for yourself, you mongrel, assassin? His words trailed off as he beheld a red hood. You have silver eyes. That was his first fizzled thought as he stared at the squirming girl in his grasp. This was no mangy mongrel sent after him by Jacques, but a child. She was young, maybe a year or so younger than Weiss, clad in a girlish outfit of black and red with a thick parka thrown over the latter. Even then she still shivered before him. Or perhaps that was from fear. Hi. She managed a weak wave, despite being upside down. If you would be so kind as to. Could you put me down now? I could, he allowed with a magnanimous grin, but why did you run into me? That seemed to knock some sense into her, because the girl's face went red like roses. I'm so sorry. I was looking for my mama and it was slippery and I tried to use my semblance, but that made it worse. She went on to rant at a rate he could not comprehend. Nope. Not having it. Stop. He held up a hand. If I put you down, will you start making sense? Speak human, not sugar rush, he commanded. She nodded fitfully. Had her parents brought her here on vacation or something? If so, they had terrible taste. Atlas was far too cold for fun. Still, far be it from him to understand the whims of mongrels. He sorted the girl right side up and set her down. Missouri, she squeaked. Honestly, parents should keep a better eye on you, assassin. Assassin. Why had he called her that just now? Well, if Weiss was his precious saber, then this speedy little imp could only be an assassin. Little did he know his nickname would stick for some time. Do you know where your parents are? Her eyes lit up as only a child's could. Yes. And where would that be? In Atlas. A bead of sweat ran down his kingly mien. So you mean to tell me that you don't know where they are? What? Were they here on vacation or something? Did it had anything to do with the vital festival? Silence reigned supreme. The girl seemed to realize her peril a moment later. Lost. Of course she was lost. Why else would she be running around like this? Naruto clapped a hand to his forehead. Kurama, save me from all these silly fools. The little lass blinked up at him. What's a Kurama? 0.0.0.0. Bleurgh. Kurama, also known as Adam Taurus, threw his head over the railing and heaved. Traveling by boat was the worst. The absolute worst. Who the hell invented such a vile contraption? When he got off this damn thing he was gonna find him in their house, rip their spine out, flay the bastard with it, then shove it down the prick's throat. He made a mental note to never do this again, even as his new body betrayed him for what felt like the umpteenth time. Screw boats, he'd much rather water walk or fly in the future, but no, he couldn't rightly do that here, because he had people to look after. Somehow he'd managed to bring forth a mass of followers after he'd broken out of that labor camp, though why they all decided to follow him, he had no bloody clue. A lifetime ago, he would have just given them some lean and sent them on their way, but no, he couldn't do that now. Damn you Naruto. Now, don't get the wrong idea, they were kind to him and he in return, but he couldn't say companions now, could he? Blake was of little help in that regard sadly, and she did try bless her little heart to ease his aching belly. The best she could do was stroke small circles across his back and even that provided precious little in the way of relief. Still, he made sure to thank her as he lifted his head and wiped his mouth with a cloth she provided. Their destination loomed in the distance, a pristine sandy green jewel set against the sea. Menagerie, the homeland of the faunus species. Which was weird because they were essentially humans to him with unique keke genke that granted a slightly different physical trait to each one who bore them, might be something to investigate in the future once he found him. Oh, dear. Best not to dwell on that lest he get distracted. You're certain your parents are there? He asked of Blake, stifling another pang of nausea. He was skeptical, but the fact alone that she claimed this was enough for him to go along with it. Wasn't as though he had anywhere else to be. The little girl nodded once, a slow, jerky bob of the head. They live here. They have to be here. I just know it. Her golden gaze went dark. They must be. Nope. Not having that. He patted her head, idly stroking her feline ears, only to arch a brow when she began to purr like an actual cat. Hey. He'd never let Matabi live this down if he ever encountered her in this life. When we make landfall, I'll teach you how to use a weapon like a proper fighter should, he offered calmly. How does that sound? Her eyes lit up with childish glee. I want a sword. Then a sword you shall have. He chortled a little as he raised his head high with pride. A thought occurred to him then, perhaps I can find some ingredients to make curry while we're here. Or maybe ramen. Damn it, Naruto. His head thumped the deck. Still rubbing off on me, even in my second life. Ramen. Curry. Blake tilted her head. What are those? And isn't Naruto a fruit? It sounds like a fruit. Is it any good? One after the other these rapid-fire questions came, nearly causing the bull faunus to nearly choke. I can eat them both, right? Oh. Can we have ice cream for dessert? Or maybe. Some of his fellow faunus laughed at his plight. Damn it. Now his face was red. There, he tousled her hair again. I'll be sure to answer all your questions after we land. Ah, if only his first and only friend were here. He would have found this girl delightful. But no, he was somewhere else, and the time of their reunion had not yet come, not quite yet, teacher. Blake blinked when he seemingly vanished from sight. He didn't so much leap as he did lunge onto the dock. As expected, he always felt more centered when he had solid ground underfoot. To be honest, he was surprised that he hadn't flung himself to the ground and began doting on it and swearing to never sail a boat again. Sand wasn't ideal, but he'd take it over the ceaseless swaying of that infernal boat. Now, let's see, then. He thumbed his chin as his fellow faunus filed out onto the dock behind him. Logic dictates we should make for the big building in the center, but. Blake nodded quickly. That's where Mom and Dad live. He laughed. Huh. What you know? Two birds with one stone. And the ramen? Blake asked as she gazed at him. Sure. Why not? He shrugged at her calmly. Then the curry. The redhead raised a brow. Why do you want both? A pause. And then. Because you asked, teacher. Greedy girl. Fair enough. He granted her a merciful shrug, although, you should call me Adam, not teacher. But a teacher is what you are, she blinked up at him. You're teaching me things. Ah, the unassailable logic of a child. Adorable. Must protect. Come. We're leaving, Blake. Blake followed him like a silent shadow. Well, maybe not so silent. The other faunus he'd saved trailed after in their wake. Kurama sighed. This is my life now, isn't it? He led them on a meandering path through Menagerie. The town was crowded, overly so, the number of people did not equate to the number of houses that could accommodate them. Were he so inclined, he'd remove the grim he could sense from across this decently sized island by himself, but seeing as 2/3 of the landmass was comprised of desert, forcing the resident faunas to congregate on smaller areas, resulting in small and dense settlements such as those with palm trees. It made sense. The biggest settlement of Menagerie and its capital was Kuo. Naturally, that was where they went. It wasn't as if there was anywhere else he could go. As he plodded uphill, he let his mind churn on, planning his next course of action, though he didn't yet know what it would be. He knew the bare basics about Menagerie. Much came back to him as he walked. The city had a population near 200,000, and as such was mostly a merchant city, one prosperous in fishing and exports since the pre-dust era. Kuo itself possesses a large built-up area, extending over a large, rectangular surface to the shores of the beach. Splitting the town vertically and horizontally were a series of large roads leading down to buildings built in a Western style, with its buildings being mildly reminiscent of neat medieval ones. Located almost in the middle of the town, overlooking the main central path, a horizontal road where events and parades are held, was Fidelis Cathedral, one of Menagerie's most important and distinctive landmarks. In the northernmost part of the city, sitting on the shore of Lake Siliora, about 4 or 5 kilometers up the Magnolia Central Path, was the chieftain's house. Add on to the fact that Kuo was a rather large town situated in a mountainous area, surrounded by extensive deserts, makes it rather difficult to traverse. Like any port city, it had its own large marina, for people entering or leaving the island. It couldn't hold a candle to the 4 kingdoms, but he found himself warming to it in his own way. As she led him up the path, a woman who resembled Blake, an obviously much older version of her, could be seen hanging up laundry on the clothesline. He took note of her at a glance, from her short hair and 3 gold piercings on her cat ears, 2 on her right, and 1 on her left, down to her black and white attire. Curiously enough, she wore a getup he would have recognized back in his era, a black hakama and sandals with white tabby socks. Over her outfit, she draped a black shrug with a long right sleeve and a short left sleeve, gold leaf trim adorning the opening on the front. She wears long, black arm warmers that extend to the middle finger. The left warmer had an odd purple band tied around the top and a pair of gold bangles around the wrist. Around her waist was a black and gold sash that trails behind her, with a gold flower-shaped buckle at the end. Blake took one look at the woman and promptly bolted in her direction. "Mom." The woman looked up with a gasp. "Who is de Blake?" Kurama had half a second to brace himself. Callie Belladonna hit him like an absolute freight train. Suffice to say, dear old dad wasn't far behind and he too swept him up into their arms and squeezed. "Damn you, Naruto." Ah, but little did he know. His old friend currently had problems of his own. 0.0.0.0. Weiss leaned back in her chair, took a deep breath, and crossed one leg over another. She inhaled deeply to steady herself, then exhaled just as forcefully. Calm. She must be calm. Yes, she was completely, truly calm. "William," she forced the words out, "who is this?" No. To hell with that. She wasn't calm at all. Clinging to her brother's broad back. ... Ruby Rose waved at her. Hi. An unlikely duo walked through the streets. Unfortunately, even when they asked people who were willing to talk to him without yelling at him, they were always given the same response, that none had seen the little assassin's mother or father when described. It was getting late, and William was beginning to doubt that they were going to be locating her parents anytime soon. Weiss wasn't best pleased after meeting Ruby, so she'd gone off to sulk for reasons he didn't quite understand. If they couldn't find her family before the sun set, she might have to stay in the manor tonight and that. "Ruby." A voice called out, drawing their attention. "There you are. I was so worried." "Mom." The younger girl cried out happily at the sight of her mother. William had to blink several times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating, and he found himself perfectly sane. "So that's her mother, I can see the resemblance," he muttered to himself before keen silver eyes rounded on him. He didn't miss the way Summer's hand rested on her axe. Her aura spiked marginally, and he could sense a buildup of energy slowly coursing through her flesh as she built up her semblance ready to fight if need be to protect her child, to teach those who tried harming her child a lesson in what it meant to mess with her family. Oh, does she actually realize how dangerous I am? Amusing, how very amusing, he noted to himself. But, much to William's surprise, the mother stood up while still embracing her daughter. Thank you, for protecting my little girl. She thanked him, her energy calming itself down as he nodded his head towards the worried mother. It is the duty of the strong to protect those who are weak. If she had remained unassisted, she would have been hurt if not worse. He acknowledged, and I have done my one good deed for the day, feel free to be impressed. You sure are an arrogant one. Summer Rose noted. It is not that I am arrogant, I am more than confident in my capabilities. I just know where I stand in the world, and the world acknowledges my presence, he responded cordially. The girl's mother snorted. That attitude, and those features, you must be Willow's boy then. No doubt influenced by your pompous father. Give me a break. William crossed his arms. The day first allow that oaf I call my sperm donor to control my actions is the day that this world dies. He answered her, unlike that mongrel, I have the power to back up my actions. My thoughts belong to naught but myself. My decisions will decide my fate, not his. And besides, he would have simply brushed your child's problems off and act as if she did not exist. He would have had her beaten had she ran into him the way she did one such as myself. But I am not my father, and he will only have one love himself, whilst I on the other hand love far beyond my pockets and ambitions to dominate the world through monopolizing the energy business. Well, thank you, for protect, Summer went to say before a loud klaxon sounded, causing the small group to turn towards the sound. Wait, is that an alarm? It was. Naruto's blood ran cold. In that moment, it was as if the entire world shifted. He remained himself, of course. He was always himself. But in that moment, something. Grim attack. He's muttered before he looked to the mother and daughter. You must flee. There's a grim horde approaching the city limits. He told them, if you manage to see my sister Weiss, tell her, I love my saber. He told them, she'll know what my words mean. His piece said, he turned and began to run through the panicking crowd as they fled away from the walls of the outer city. Wait. Summer suddenly appeared in front of William, her daughter still in her grasp, and she placed a hand on his chest to stop him. I can't let you put yourself in this kind of risk, it's best to leave this to the military. She told him, come with us and we will get to the shelters together. The military could care less about this sect of the population, and by the time they mobilize it'd be too late to stop the horde. He responded as he brushed past and began to push through the crowd. Tell her my message, if I do not make it through this. And if you do? Summer asked as she appeared before him again. Then this world will know not to underestimate me. He told her, this city will survive. And the grim who trespass on this kingdom will understand my power. They will become my slaves. Today, they pay their tribute in blood. He said, turning to face the two women, his eyes turning a crimson that was redder than any blood, a obsidian slit that was darker than any abyss glowed back at Summer. It made her step back. He ran past her once more, this time unimpeded as he raced towards the city walls. Ruby cried out something, but he didn't hear her properly, moving as quickly as he was. Jumping across the various roofs and buildings like he would have as a ninja, he reached the wall and raced up the blockade and reached the precipice and watched as the few dozen people who were willing to give their lives for others to escape stood ready to fight. Hold the line. One of them shouted. Know that if we die today, we die with honor. Another declared. The horde was upon them. Tens upon hundreds of thousands. A horde larger than any other stood before them, and instantly William understood that this wasn't a meager assault, this was an extermination. The sheer variety of beasts before him showed that there was something more to this than let on. This swarm was meant to topple the kingdom. Why do you all stare at death and cry? He demanded. Fall back, I will take the front. He stated as the wall began to glow. Massive glyphs sprouting into existence along the entire wall, the encircling defense which would have been a prison for their demise now becoming an impenetrable fortress. Lord William. A man cried out in shock, "You shouldn't be out here, go home." The soldier cried out. The glyphs shone a blinding silver as William began to sweat from exertion. The teenage-year-old stood stoically at the edge as the weapons he prepared were pulled from the depths of his gate. "No, the horde is too large to repel with meager forces like our own," he responded. "I will hold the line. Look no further than the shining light that is my strength to guide you," he said as the massive cannons he pulled out from his gate finished materializing. But we cannot risk your life, you are a child with much to live for." A female bear faunus responded. "And this city is a prison from the inside. If the Grimm pass you, you would die regardless from the overwhelming numbers. At least if I can push them back, I will have done my service for my home, our home," he responded. "No, leave, young man, and that is final." The man from roared in anger. "Get ready," a man shouted. William, however, was focused on the wave of Grimm. "Here they come, they have reached the wall," he stated as he watched the wave of black shadows reach the edge of the city. William then smirked, the wind blowing through the air and ruffling his hair. He held out a hand and a staff appeared in a flash and landed in his palm. Raising the weapon into the air, he surged his power, causing a silver ring of energy began to circulate around the head of the weapon. "This is it, Atlas, stand against the world," he declared boldly, immense amounts of energy spreading across the ground as he summoned his chakra and mixed it in with his semblance, dozens of pebbles rising into the air as his power washed out over the ground, causing everyone who stood along the wall to gawk in shock at what they were witnessing. "All of you just stand and bear witness," he told the group of soldiers as his power worked through his weapons as begun to glow along the wall at the same time, the heavenly glow rising up and entering the dark clouds lingering overhead as the ring of light encompassed the walls. As this happened, the same man who had tried to push William felt his eyes widen in shock. "You don't possess anything that'll shoot from these things, and yet they're all operating on their own," he called in shock as each one William had called upon began to moan and creak before powering up through the energy provided by the boy. William snorted in amusement. "Who do you think I am?" he demanded, the massive cannons creaking and groaning as they moved around, taking aim at the wave of obsidian monsters they were presented with, the points of the massive weapons now glowing with golden energy and sparks of electricity as they powered up. "All 720 dingirs called forth on the wall around this city were made by my hands," he stated, and then the sky was filled with light as they all unleashed their power, a line of dazzling golden light filling the sky as each one opened fire. "Charged with my energy and my semblance, I alone control them all," he declared boldly, slamming the bottom of the staff into the ground as the initial salvo raining down upon the front lines of the Grimm with a righteous fury. "I can work this body to death, and control everyone," he declared seriously as his entire gate worked to its limitations and beyond as the cannons he summoned gave everything they had at the unending wave, engulfing the world in a cloud of fire and destruction. The soldiers, the fleeing citizens, the mobilizing military members, the ones who were able to watch from a television. All of them stopped what they were doing as they watched in awe as they watched the cannons bombard the massive horde of Grimm. The cannons, which William had named as dingirs, were incredibly powerful weapons. They each were unto themselves massive cannons with enough power to wipe cities off the map, and required an immense amount of power to operate them. The fact he alone was controlling them all on his own without any secondary thought to his actions was something that would have made anyone in power balk in shock. "Now sit back and watch, you'll see what I can do to stop this horde," the teen called out as a massive alpha wyvern that was too large to be able to fly cried out in agony, an explosion striking it in the face, ripping the bone-like armor off in a single blast, a dozen more bombarding its body and ripping it to shreds in an instant. The dark night was filled with the dazzling display of the young Schnee heir's counter-offense. Hundreds, no, thousands of streaks of golden light soared through the sky over their heads, exploding with enough power to shake the city and outlying forest, incredible amounts of debris filled the air from the vast amount of impacts due to the explosions that engulfed the horde, thousands of the beasts perishing in explosions of fire and destruction. Amazing, the lead soldier whispered in awe. Feel free to pick off the incoming stragglers that bypass my bombardment. I cannot let up my attack for an instant. To do so would be to doom this city. William commanded. Towards the western sect, a herd of 20 megalith have avoided the initial bombardment. They will breach the wall if not stopped. Aim for the back of their necks using heavy missile fire, this should destroy them. He commanded. How do you know this? The man demanded. I know everything that happens when I use my gate. My weapons are extensions of my will, my very soul. Where they are, I am. What they strike, I strike, and what they miss I miss. He declared. Now go. I will tell you of any others that bypass my defense. He told them. The man nodded. It was good enough for him. You heard him, boy. Let's move out and take care of those grim. He commanded. 0.0.0.0. While William was holding the line, Willow took the time to grab her children before rushing to safety. But when she had gathered them, she immediately noticed something was off. Weiss, where is your twin? Where is William? She asked in desperation. Weiss shrugged and began to babble in confusion and fear. I don't know. He said he was headed down to the city for some things, but he never came back, she responded. Before she or any of her siblings could speak up, the television reporter that had broadcasted the news of the horde immediately spoke up in a mixed tone. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you will want to believe this, but there seems to be some form of artillery bombardment from the entire wall of the city commencing. She said as the footage immediately changed to show the massive cannons firing streaks of golden light up into the air, the streaks soaring up over the city before crashing down and forming an unbreachable line in the sand as it were to hold off the nigh unending wave of grim that sought to destroy them. From various eyewitness reports, it appears that these artillery cannons have seemingly materialized along the wall. She said in shock. I mean, I wouldn't have believed it myself, but astonishingly enough, there is footage of the Schnee family glyph semblance appearing along the outer edges of the city defensive wall that shows this remarkable feat taking place before they all activate and begin countering this massive horde. The announcer said as footage showed the proof that it was in fact the Schnee glyph semblance at work to stop the horde of Grimm trying to breach their beloved city to try and destroy it. Willow no longer heard what else the reporter had to say, because the imagery changed to show the person they sought standing boldly in the very forefront of the massive wave of unending monsters at the gate. And she gasped, a hand rising to her mouth in shock and horror of where her boy stood at that moment. William. Winter shook in her boots at what she was watching. The horde was indescribable, but what held them back she could not describe in words alone. It was, in a word, light. And above all that, laughter. Of her foolish brother who called himself king. 0.0.0.0. William used his free hand to point to another direction of the wall. Eastern section, 30 Goliath, 20 Alpha Griffins, 48 Giant Nevermore, 52 Beowulfs with 2 of them being Alphas. Strike using fire dust, then shoot wind dust into the blast to enhance the flames. Launch rockets at the Nevermore wings to bring them down, then use explosive dust round to take them down, he ordered. Sweat was pouring through his clothes from the exertion he was pushing his body through, but he had to hold on. This horde was as vast as it was large, and the Grimm were now circling the walls, and if they even got one Grimm through the line of cannon fire, then they were finished. He then grunted as something slammed into the bottom of the wall he stood upon and grunted. He looked down and saw an immensely large wyvern bashing its head into the structure. He grunted before he opened a wall of his own portals and unleashed a blinding wave of unlimited blades down upon the creature. The alpha wyvern roared in agony as its flesh was ripped apart by the swords before it stepped away, the swords continuing to bombard the creature before 3 of the dingirs managed to take aim at the beast and fire upon it, ripping it to shreds before firing back into the horde as his normal gate continued to hold the opening he had created using the dingirs. Gazing out across the destruction, all he saw was darkness. The line had been drawn by his own hand, but the few Grimm who crossed it were numerous. There had to be an end to this. No. There was an end to it. Holding his free hand out, he opened a glyph that sought the deepest parts of his gate. However, unlike his normal portals opening up behind him, this one opened up next to his foot, and as this happened, blood-red wisps of energy began to whirl around him, whipping his hair through the wind. The golden portal was larger than average, but something about it was not right. It gave off a powerfully ominous and primordial feel of power unlike any other, and whatever he was summoning, was stronger than any mortal blade could hope to be. It held an abnormal shape that doesn't match what would normally be classified as something specialized like a sword. It is something that was born before the appearance of the concept that the world calls a sword, so it is not something that can truly be called a sword or have the shape of any known blade. While it has a grip, hand guard, and is the same length as a longsword, the section that should contain a blade deviated from the normal form of an edged weapon. The blade itself and the tip of the sword spun in a spiral shape, strangely dull. It has the shape of a cylindrical, drill-shaped pillar made up of 3 independently rotating segments engraved with crimson lines that spin slowly in an alternating direction like querns, the middle segment spinning clockwise and the top and bottom segments spinning counterclockwise. All if you stand back, it is best that we give our all so that we end this farce. William declared, no longer will first hold back that which can end it all. He called out, Lord William. A man shouted as the winds howled around, forcing everyone to cover themselves from the gale force winds summoned forth. What are you doing? He cried out to the young man. William ignored the man as he smirked. I've begun enjoying myself. Stand back, before you are caught within. He answered as he grabbed onto the weapon with his gloved hand. He declared as the weapon was released from its confines, a deep unnatural primal hum filling the air as the sword's sections began to spin. I don't understand. What do you mean by that? He demanded. William ignored him as he looked ahead of him, uniting dreams beneath a banner of conquest. I praise your efforts at least. But foolish creatures, have you not learned? Dreams disappear when the dreamer wakes. Every last one of them with no exception. He stated in seriousness, as a deep unnatural primal hum filling the air as the sword's sections began to spin, as he poured more power into the blade. The Dingirs never once stopped their bombardment slowed, but never stopped but the shining light brought forth by the weapon, Aya, outshined the destruction by 100-fold. Therefore, it was inevitable that I would be the one to stand in your way. Creatures of Grimm, beasts of disaster. Know the end of your master's eternal dream. I shall now show you the stark reality of when you challenge me. He stated seriously as he held up the weapon he had called upon, the point of the blade aimed at the heavens above and ready to strike down the world at the behest of its master. The sections of the blade were glowing, rotating faster and quickly filling to the brim with godly power. He took a brief moment to bask in it. Now, awaken EA. A stage worthy of you has been set. Gaze upon the crushing might of my sword of rupture. William commanded, behold. And then, as he made his declaration, he immediately halted the bombardment from his cannons as he finished readying his weapon of choice. Enuma Elish. He roared, and he swung down. The explosion tore across the surface of the planet, scorching everything in sight, ripping the land apart, rupturing the very fabric of the foundations of creation. The whole of Atlas trembles from the solitary blow from the weapon. All those who gazed upon the destruction cried out as they were flung away through the air, their cries drowned out by Aya as it tore the vast majority of the grim horde apart on a level that none could comprehend on an imaginary level. The ruins that stood outside of the city's limitations was all but vaporized, but even then, he had only removed 2/3 of the full horde itself. This meant that while he had destroyed a vast majority of the horde, there were still thousands of Grimm that would need to be killed. Aya could only charge up so much energy in a single blow and required time to regain strength, power he could easily provide yes but would more than likely strain the weapon after a single use. If he charged it again, There was no telling if Aya would blow up in his face and kill those around him, but Pietro still was testing the weapon's limitations and creating advanced additions to put into the weapon to ensure its continued use. But still, a third was better than before. Because unlike the tens of thousands that stood against him, there was only around 150-200,000 Grimm left out of a horde of what had been around 900,000-1 million Grimm beasts that had attacked his home. The Grimm had been scattered by the discharge of Aya, littering the ground as they shakily clamored to their feet. The people who had lined the walls climbed to their feet and gazed across the place where the Grimm had been rushing them from. Despite the monsters now slowly climbing to their feet, they would need to reorganize themselves before rushing headlong into William's cannon fire. Then there was the destruction left in the wake of Aya activating. A large crevice had been opened up in the earth, drilling downwards in a seemingly endless pit of darkness. Flames flickered through various cracks ripped into the ground. The group looked on in awe before one looked to William. "Why didn't you use that in the beginning?" she demanded. "It takes time to bring forth, and even longer to charge up upon activation. Not only that, but the Dingirs could allot a time for which we could gather our forces to counter the horde, but it seems that Ironwood is more worried about himself than those of us here," he said as he watched the remaining wave of Grimm rush forth. "Work for me, Dingirs," he commanded as a new wave of explosions rippled through the air and began bombarding the horde once more. He grunted as he felt the strain on his reserves. His chakra was reaching its critical limits, and a visible streak of blood flowed from his nose and mouth as he pushed himself even further after using Aya. "William, stop," the man said in panic as he saw the blood leak from his nose and mouth. "You don't need to." He went to say that William need not push himself anymore and that the horde could be handled by the regular forces, but William interrupted him instead. "Are you saying it's impossible? That I can't do it? That this is my limit? That I cannot fight anymore?" he demanded, not stopping his second wave of endless attacks. "Do not make such audacious claims when you have yet to see the true potential of one who wishes to see all he can do." He snarled back, "I will fight them until the last one has fallen, or so help me I am unworthy of my name." What did they know of limits? He hadn't even begun to test his. Not yet. The man steeled his resolve to let the boy face down the horde. The boy was doing what many others were unwilling to do, to stand for what they believed in. He nodded as he stood tall. "Men, let's help the lad exterminate these abominations," he called to the others as they all exclaimed their agreement and lofted their weapons into the air. William snorted. "Very well then, let's protect our home," he said with a wry grin. "There are several packs breaking from the rear of this horde. They will flank us in the southern sect. There is a structural deficiency in place from a previous attack. If they break through, then we have failed," he told them. "How many?" a woman asked him. "No less than 100 mid-level Grimm with teenage of their alphas with them," he told them. "Use dust explosives to collapse the ground 100 yards ahead of the flaw in the wall. This will form a pit that will delay them as they try to find a way to circumnavigate it, but this will allow you to pick them off with ease," he told them. "My cannons will handle the rest of the stragglers in the rear," he told them. "Anywhere else?" another asked. "Yes, here. This is where the bulk of their forces are concentrating their power. There will be no less than 300 Grimm that will escape my bombardment. Several dozen will be alpha-level Grimm capable of spawning other Grimm into being. We cannot afford to fall here," he told them. He then turned around to face each of them, his cannons firing constantly as he looked to each and every man or woman before him. Human, faunus, young, old, wise, incompetent, male, female. They all stood before him with a conviction to do what they felt needed be done. "You all know the cost that will come, and what is at stake. I know not any of you, but have come to trust each of you with my life, but between those who share the same conflictions, there can be no hatred. I share your concerns. We are not soldiers, many of you are still civilians without semblance or aura. If the entire gathering of the people here now were capable of such powers of use, we would all be legends, but the tales of this day are untold by the many. Glory in battle is not my way, our way. Think of our heroes of yore. Of King Vortex, who defeated a gathered trio of enemy nations and their armies of over 3 million strong, with but a stroke of his blade that split the world asunder and created the maps we know today. He told them. He paused, letting his words sink in. Or the inspiring tales of the warrior king Leonidas, who in the final days of his life personally led 300 of his finest soldiers into an inevitable fight that delayed his enemies for 3 days and 3 nights so his nation could prepare themselves for conflict they were yet not ready to fight in, but in doing so kept an unstoppable army at bay with sheer courage and determination. He called out boldly as each of those before him stood tall upon hearing his words, "These giants do not seem to give us solace here, but they are not all that we are. Before the kingdoms, there was the people. Before diplomacy, there were soldiers." He stated boldly. "Our influence will be but a drop in the ocean from this day forth when the grim come through us, but before that we will hold the line. Our influence will be what not just slowed them, but stops the horde, but before that we will hold the line. Our influence will stop the deaths of the innocent beyond this wall. In the battle today, we will hold the line. It doesn't matter what you are, or where you hail from. Human, faunus, man, woman, we all bleed red, because today, we will hold this line." He called as each of them cheered loudly, hearts and minds united behind a common cause. He couldn't help but smile at their enthusiastic response. How long had it been since he fought in a war? Too long. Time to rid himself of the rust. Now, then, let us begin. 0.0.0.0. The news hadn't gotten any better. If anything, it had only grown worse before a small video showed footage of William summoning that weapon she despised so much before he fired into the nigh unending horde, ripping a chunk of the world away. And yet, the horde didn't stop coming. And yet, at the same time, William didn't back down either. Weiss was worried for her twin, scared even, when she saw him turn around and commanded the civilian fighters to positions that were vulnerable to attack. The blood running down his nose, his chin and neck, showed how hard he was pushing himself. General Ironwood had refused to assemble the Atlas forces and command an all-out assault against the horde simply because the cannons William had summoned were drawing a line in the sand. Jacques cared more about the lean he could line his pockets with than the potential death of his eldest son, merely saying that if he died protecting useless animals. Winter was silently praying for her little brother to come through the fight unharmed. Whitley, bless his little heart, was holding his hand out and pointing at the television as he called out to his brother, as if William would respond to his calls. As for Willow, she was shaking. Be it from fear or anxiety, Weiss would never know, but even she could tell that mother was more than worried for her boy as he showed his dedication to fighting against the horde before him. Even having wiped out a vast majority of the monsters at the door, he was still determined to fight against them. His reserves were most certainly beyond taxed from the constant use of his semblance, but he was anything if not stubborn. He was going to be fine. He had to come out looking nothing less than the hero that the city and its population had come to see him as. The hero of the Kingdom of Atlas. 0.0.0.0. A massive Grim had managed to pass the bombardment, regular dust rounds pinged off the dense armor covering it. It looked like a massive dragon mixed with a Beowulf and Ursa Major. It was trying to climb up the wall, but William wouldn't have it as he finally managed to push the tens of thousands of Grim back enough to focus on the beast beneath as it reached the upper ledge and began to pull its massive bulk up over the edge of the wall, separating the living from the monster's roaring death. The Grim gave a roar and the Schnee air narrowed his eyes as he gazed upon the creature before the gate unleashed a veritable rain of swords. An endless was of steel had came crashing down upon the massive Omega-class Alpha Grim, causing it to cry out as hundreds upon thousands of blades were impaled into its flesh, the weapons vanishing into golden dust seconds after, only for 1,000 more to stab into the creature's flesh once more. No part of the beast was spared the boy's wrath as everything was stabbed into its face, hands, chest, arms and legs, and very wings. Even the ground was ripped apart where it caused the Grim to slide further back down the wall, a rain of dust and stone. Swords, axes, lances, daggers, anything and everything that could or would stab, pierce, impale, it was all there raining hell down upon the massive creature. The collective gathering of all William's weaponry was unleashing everything it could. The weapons unleashed in the vast collection of raining steel gathered by one person went unstopped as it sliced down and into the Grimm's flesh. The Grimm cried out in pain, letting go of the wall it was climbing and wailing as it was shoved back to the ground below hundreds of feet in an instant, the vast collection of weapons continuing to rain down upon it in a veritable machine gun-like manner at the speed of lightning itself. "You shall not pass," William snarled out as his cannons aimed down at the beast and fired a volley, hundreds of blasts upon the beast, the explosions rocking the wall from where he stood, and causing people to cry out as they stumbled about from the impacts. "Lord William, the rear wall has been secured, tell us what you need us to do." A woman called out to him. "Head to the eastern sector of the wall, you should have a few dozen Grimm climbing up the wall there. Mostly Beowulf and Ursa." He told her, "This is the final push. Hold the line and the pack will fall." He called out as he slammed a fist forward, crushing the facial plate of a jumping Borbatusk and sending its corpse falling off the wall he stood on, the body dropping down on a large Deathstalker in the process as it pulled the massive Grimm off and killed it in the process, the two Grimm dissolving as they both fell to the ground beneath the wall. A flock of Nevermore shrieked, pulling his gaze up, and once more a wave of destruction responded as he attacked each bird individually. Boom, crash, blam. The cannons erupted, expelling fire and death, and their cries of anger and hatred turning into roars of pain as they fell from the sky in the dozens, the wails of the dead and dying Grimm taking no pity from the young man as he continued to fight with a combination of cannon fire and the use of his gate as he picked off various Grimm. Countless sounds of firearms going off around him filled the air as those who had followed him into battle fought back with everything they could. And the following 20 minutes were filled with the screams of the dead or dying, be it a person resisting or those of the Grimm. The once massive horde of tens if not hundreds of thousands of Grimm dwindled away as they either charged to their deaths or broke off and fled back to the hell which they called home. But it could not be denied that the city had indeed survived because of the actions William had taken, the rallying of those who were willing to die for their homes and family. Ironwood was sure to face a major backlash for his choice of being inactive in the fighting, and Jacques, well, people already hated his guts, but for him to be uncaring for his eldest boy was just adding fuel to the fire against him. 0.0.0.0. When the fighting was finally finished, William deigned to allow himself looked over by a faunus who was in fact both a huntsman and a doctor. Nothing aside from the major strain he had placed upon himself by using the full force of his semblance was noted, thus he was given antibiotics and pain meds for the minor headaches he would have for the next month. With that said and done, he decided it was best to make his way home to face the music that was his family. As he trudged along, he never noticed a pair of crimson eyes gazing down upon him, dark ebony hair blowing in the wind before the figure turned around with a smirk as she opened a portal back to her tribe. Oh yes, William would have his work cut out for him, the stalking notwithstanding. It was indeed a good day to have lived. Walking through the streets, William ignored the people who gave him praise. It was a given since he had nearly killed himself as he headed towards his home. He was stopped when a familiar pair of people approached him, as well as their tagalongs. A certain golden-haired girl was grinning in excitement as she and the assassin Ruby rushed at him. "Dude, how did you manage to do that? I've never seen anything like it. You have gotta teach me how to do that," she exclaimed. "Berserker? Definitely a berserker." She had the look and feel of one. "Assassin? Who is this golden-haired madwoman?" he asked the shorter of the two. "Assassin." Young felt herself exclaim at what he called her sister before his words clicked in her mind. "Oi, that's not very nice." William sighed. "Her hood reminded me of an assassin, so that's what she is to me." He told her, it wasn't meant as an insult, and she never stated otherwise. He shrugged in response to the question. Assassin grinned eagerly as she bounced around. "Oh, yes, well, this here is my sister, Young, and you have already met our mom Summer." she said excitedly. Humph. Berserker. Seems like a good name for her. He remarked as he gazed at the excitable blonde. My name is Yang. The blonde snarled before she blinked. And I see your point, she muttered as William raised a brow in response. He then turned to Summer. So, mother of assassin, did you deliver my message to my twin? He asked her. Ruby whined a little. I'm really not an assassin. He looked her way. That is what I have chosen to call you, thus it is what you are. His gaze sought Summer once more. Did you do what I asked or not? It seemed like you had it all handled, so no. Her smile had a knowing glint to it. His right eye twitched. It would have been more considerate had you told her, but for the simple fact that I might have perished in my excursion against the filth that tried to attack my home, he said, somewhat annoyed. Now, don't make that face. She nudged Ruby forward. My girl has something to say to you. Ruby shuffled forward, wringing her hands. Sue. You can summon weapons. There was no point in denying it after his little show just now. Naruto quirked a pale brow. I can indeed. What of it? And why did he have a bad feeling about this? And you can basically summon whatever you want. Her fingers poked together nervously in excitement barely contained, any kind of weapon. Like, heroic weapons. A silver brow quirked up, with time and effort, yes. Arms crossed, why? Sanuva. Ruby jumped him with a squeal. Can you be my partner when I got beacon? Please. I never said anything about please. Calming his heart rate, he cleared his throat as he peeled the little gremlin off. You've brave, I'll give you that. He regarded his dirty armor with a glower. I've killed people for less. Guileless silver eyes blinked up at him. But you wouldn't kill a future teammate, right? I never said I was going to be your. Please. Herm. Too cute. Why him? Yang grumbled. What am I? Chopped liver. At the moment, yes, berserker. Don't call me that. Summer giggled. As repayment for that little show and making sure Ruby was returned to me safely, I'll take you back to Willow, she told him as she looked to her girls, kids. She looked to her daughters. Hold on to me right quick, we'll be taking a slight detour before leaving for the motel. Did she speak of her semblance? Interesting, but I need not the help of a mongrel. Whoa, he didn't have the chance to tell her off before she grabbed him. Ruby and Yang latching onto her cloak as she looked to the manor he called home. He was still speaking when the four vanished in the blink of an eye. All that showed they had been there was a pebble that fell to the snow in the middle of the footprints indented into the ground. When they reappeared while he was still speaking, mind you, Summer rubbed the top of his head as she interrupted his talking as she smiled at him. See you at the Vital Festival if you decide to come. I'll introduce you to Tai Yang, then. Tai who now? Now wait just a. Summer nudged him forward and vanished into nothingness, taking her daughters with her. William made angry William noises as he looked at the direction he could feel those insufferable women and shook his hand at them, uncaring if he was all on his own, and then he blinked. Vital Festival. Now there was an idea. Oh well, things to think on at a later time and date. William limped tiredly into his home, and immediately wished he had stayed away as Willow, Winter, Whiteley, and Weiss came rushing at him. Willow was the first to reach him as she scooped him up and embraced him. Oh, my dear sweet, brave child, what were you thinking facing such an overwhelming force on your own? She said as she held him by the shoulders and shook them in fright. I was thinking of protecting my home, my people, my family. He told her, this city is my kingdom, and I will do all that I must to ensure that it is a prosperous place for all those who seek to live within it. And those who dare to trespass without my permission will understand that by doing so they will invoke my wrath. William, for once, stop talking like an overly egotistical jerk for a second and think about it from mother's perspective. Weiss said as she and their siblings encircled him, you could have died, and we'd have never been able to do anything that could have prevented it. Oh, my dear sweet Saber, to think that you would weep for the misbegotten soul that is mine own. I am genuinely touched by your lack of faith how my abilities work. he smirked at his twin. William, this is no joking matter, you could have been seriously hurt or killed. Winter told him as she stepped up to him. Yes, I know, but I would have died with my honor intact, unlike Ironwood or Jacques, who seemed to think that the world could do fine with the deaths of the innocent and unguarded. He said sternly, but now, with my show of force, I have secured my stature as a hero of sorts. I need not these fools' appraisal of my skills, just for them to have a life better than what they had yesterday. He continued her in response, and I know what I wish to do next. And what, pray tell, is that, brother? Winter sighed as she rubbed her temples. William smirked, his wild hair shifting as he planted both hands on his hips. I am going to enter the vital festival, and I am going to dominate it on my own. He said haughtily, and all will be welcome to challenge me for the title of victor, but it shall be not be I alone who contends for the title of victor in the competition. A beat of silence followed. And then, William. The three women screamed at him in exasperation. Poor Whitley was just so confused by everything that was going on. The young child was simply content to hug his laughing brother's leg as he explained what his plan of action was for his seemingly inevitable win in the fighting. Simpler times. James Ironwood was clapped in irons as soon as the horde had been dispersed and destroyed. Stripped of rank and stature alike, he'd been shoved into a orange prison uniform to await his trial with various executive judges. Among these judges were the Council of Headmasters, the as of yet peaceful White Fang hierarchy, William Schnee himself, who had repelled the massive horde almost single-handedly, and it was to be broadcasted for the people to watch. Usually when a general or anyone in such a high position of authority were to be under such circumstances as he, this would be a private affair and kept silent from the public. Alas, William Schnee had made a single and very powerful point. Let the world know of his cowardice, and his fate would be decided upon conclusion. He couldn't try to fault that logic, and Jacques was slimy enough to have escaped a trial by saying he had been attending a business meeting, a story that had been proven true when the board of directors that worked at the SDC confirmed his tale, so the slippery bastard had gotten away with it by the skin of his teeth. But not him. Atlas needed a scapegoat. He was brought out of his silent thoughts when the door to his cell opened with a resounding clang of metal. A guard stood before him, weapon in hand. Time to go, prisoner. Very well then, let's get this over with. James sighed. 0.0.0.0. The gathered witnesses from various portions of the population, military and SDC, were in their seats waiting for the trial to begin. Silent murmurs were filling the room as to their own thoughts and theories on what could possibly happen. These murmurs were interrupted when the doors opened and the man whom was most despised by Mantle was walked in under guard. His hands were chained to his waist, and his ankles were shackled to provide minimal movement in case he tried to resist and attempt escape, a precaution that William proposed as a safety measure, as you never knew what was going to happen. Look at him, what a waste of potential. To think he was once in charge of Atlas military power. Such a disgrace to the best of this world's leadership. Piece of trash. Whispers of discontent filled the room as he walked past. Various people, human and faunus alike, were separated on either side of the aisle to prevent a possible fight, but was followed by the polite request of both Ozpin and William, who didn't want anything to tear the court apart by discrepancies. James grunted as he was pushed down into a chair roughly and then cuffed to the table via a small chain that connected his wrists to the table. The bailiff stood before the massive raised podium stoically as he did his duty, and then the door opened to reveal the panel of judges that were to determine his fate. All rise. The Bear Faunus commanded. The panel of headmasters, Council of Faunus, and Lord of Mantle, William Schnee presiding this case, is now in session. He called out loud enough for everyone in the room to hear his voice. As the respective personnel reached their seats, they each took a seat where their name was clearly visible to the court to read it. Ozpin, who was the leader of the Council of Headmasters, cleared his throat as he placed a file down upon the mahogany wood. Please be seated, he said calmly as the room sat back down. The headmaster of Beacon then looked to the bailiff beneath the large gathering and spoke up. Mr. Claw, please swear in the jury, he requested politely as the massive bear of a man. Disregard that very terrible pun. Anyways, the bailiff nodded as he turned to the jury that stood next to the panel of judges across the room. Please raise your right hand. He told the 12 jurors, and then spoke deeply and seriously. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that you will truly listen to this case and render a true verdict and a fair sentence as to this defendant? All 12 members nodded as one, and answered in a single voice, we do. As jurors, you are not to be swayed by sympathy. Your duty is to listen to the questions and answers and decide what actions were wise, and which were not. Upon conclusion of this proceeding, you will determine the outcome of the sentencing of former General James Michael Ironwood. He told them, please be seated. Ozpin pulled out a few sheets of paper and began shifting through them. Now, as this the final day of this trial, we should inform all present that if found guilty, former General, you will be executed without question, but if your innocence remains intact, you will be discharged dishonorably, all your assets confiscated, your wages stripped and distributed to the families of those who died fighting in the counter-offense for the city, and you will be imprisoned for the remainder of your days. Ironwood didn't react. Naruto found himself tempted to smash a Rasengan through his head. But as William Schnee, he could hardly do that now, could he? Instead, he cleared his throat. Now, we as a consensus have agreed to some obligations if it comes down to the guilt, but we would grant you a final request as allowed. Should you prove innocent, you know what awaits you, he said seriously. Gira looked to the bailiff. Has the jury reached a decision? He questioned. A juror stood up and nodded as she held out a piece of paper. She was a dark-skinned woman with tiger stripes showing she was a tiger faunus, and she wasn't the only faunus on the jury. It was split half human half faunus for an equal voice. The bailiff took it as the woman spoke. We the jury have indeed come to a verdict in regards of the defendant, she stated. Having nearly gone to a hung jury, we have concluded that upon being faced with facts and evidence presented to us, we the jury have found the defendant, one James Michael Ironwood, guilty of attempted genocide against the innocent populace of both Atlas and Mantle with the intent to force a military growth to lash out in war. A juror stated, a soft look of displeasure of having sentenced a man to his death. James Ironwood, we of the council hereby find you guilty to attempted genocide against the populace of not only Mantle and the citizens within her walls, but the willingness to allow those of Atlas to potentially be slaughtered had the Grimm breached the walls of Mantle where the remaining citizens would have undoubtedly perished. Now, have you anything to say for yourself before we get down to the sentencing, James? If so, please inform this gathering of people as to why you seemingly allowed a horde of Grimm so close you not only your borders, but to the walls of the city. He questioned. My reasons are my own. The world doesn't need to know why I chose to act the way I did, James said from his seat. Gotcha. Actually, Ironwood, they do, Naruto stated, leaning forward atop his chair, because, the simple fact of the matter is this. If it weren't for my intervention and using my own semblance, then this city, these people who live here among them who are my blood and many of those who are in this very room would all be dead. He crossing both hands before his chest, I'm not sure if you had an escape contingency plan for yourself and your closest followers, but understand this, cowardice is the cheap route to success. The man's jaw clenched, his gaze narrowing ever so slightly. My actions were not those of a coward. Then you won't mind explaining them to the court. I cannot. Then you are a coward, he countered. Ironwood snorted. Oh really, and you think you could do better? I don't think so, I know so, he responded, but we aren't here for me, we are here because of you and your inability to protect that which you have sworn to. He told Ironwood, and due to this, you are facing the full brunt of your cowardice to not only the people of Atlas, but those of Mantle who live beneath the city that floats. My cannons controlled the tempo of the battle, ensuring that no Grimm could enter Mantle from the ground and kept the evocational type Grimm away from Atlas which sits above, and yet you hid like a coward. There it was, the knife if in his argument, stabbing deep, fracturing the man's rigid self-control. I did what I thought was right, you will not change my mind, child. Ironwood scowled, We as a civilization have become too dependent on dust, on technology, to get us out of the hard situations in which our own power could solve the issues for us. The last words tore out of him in a snarl. I wanted to fix that weakness, by putting mankind back where it belonged. It would have been perfect, mankind growing strong through the suffering of a united cause. The world is united in its own way. Gira said, it's not perfect, but it is enough to ensure our survival. Survival is to ensure that the strong thrive and the weak die. Ironwood snapped back. I am strong, those who were down in mantle were weak. It was time someone did something, and I acted in the way I thought best. Your best intentions nearly cost an entire civilian population their lives. Leonardo Lionheart spoke up. Is that truly the way it works? Something broke in Ironwood's then, shattering his composure altogether. You fight for your country, you lose so much that was dear to you, and then you're done with. The uniform's forgotten. You have no voice. My life has been devoted to protecting everyone I could, but what if the only way to protect people is to let them die so that others don't have to suffer that same fate? In peace, sons bury their fathers. In war, fathers bury their sons. Ozpin stated, this was more than just a war that could be avoided, this was a blatant attempt at extermination, he said as he gazed down. With a sigh, Ozpin raised the gavel. James Ironwood, you are hereby sentenced to death. Your sentence will be carried out in a month's time, and until then you will sit in the highest grade prisoner cell in the world, Shurgam Prison, the prison which ever only holds one prisoner at any given time. James sprang to his feet. Ozpin, you can't be serious. You yourself would have done the same. Sacrifices must be made. Even that boy can't hold her off forever. Down came the gavel with a resounding bang. This case is concluded. Thank you, jury, for your service today. Once more a bang sounded out. This session is adjourned. The old man watched as someone he once called friend was marched out, the people glaring holes at him. How the mighty had fallen. 0.0.0.0. Naruto placed both hands in his hair, sat down and sighed. He perked up when he watched the door open and saw Headmaster Ozpin enter the room. Headmaster Ozpin. He greeted shortly with a nod. William, my dear boy, how do you fare? Barely functioning right now from lack of sleep, but that is what happens when you are judging evidence presented to you to determine a man if he is or isn't worth his life. He responded, James Ironwood was a role model to many before this fiasco, but even I am incapable of seeing as to why he would perform such blatant actions against the civilian population. They say power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, but was that truly the case here? Ozpin nodded silently. Yes, and while some of us will miss him, we have to look to the future of our people. He stated as he sipped his coffee. So, have you thought about a possible future in your education? I'm sure you would excel if you allowed yourself to travel to places you might not have been. He said calmly, we at Beacon would be glad to accept someone such as yourself in our curriculum to help others grow and thrive. Aha! Here came the pitch he'd been expecting. Naruto would have jumped at in his first life. William merely sighed, first only want to see Weiss succeed. My ambitions aren't as high as everyone else seems to think they are. He said looking to the older man, they call me a lord or a king all they want, but we both know the truth. He shook his head and sat up. The king is the next generation in which we fight to protect, one which Ironwood forsook the day that horde attacked my home and family and the people I bled to protect from extermination. I just wish I could have done more. Ozpin sat beside him. I'll tell you something that an old friend once told me, and you can take it however you wish. He said clasping his hands together, sure, he took his words from a song, but I like to think they might hold a slight bit of significance to what I am now trying to tell you. He said softly to the lad, he told, your blue might be gray, your less might be more. Your window to the world might be your own front door. Your shiniest day might come in the middle of the night. And I like to think that it is something that even you can understand, that the littlest change can have the biggest of impacts, and just between us, you did make a big impact on that day. William hummed, I'll think on it. That's all I ask, young man. Take your time. While the entrance exams won't be held for some time, the vital festival is commencing soon, and I am sure that when we weren't judging James's actions, you were readying yourself for your little surprise. The last bit was delivered with a raised brow. Or shall I call it an interruption, given that you plan to crash the festivities? I haven't the foggiest idea what you mean. Ozpin sighed. Whatever spectacle you have planned, please mind the collateral damage. William smirked. It was wise that this old man noticed his growth. He was the strongest of all beings after all. 0.0.0.0. Do you really have to pay me so much for something so practical? A voice spoke through the scroll. Yes, because I want results, not promises. William responded with a scowl, and if I can take your feeble mind of something as a mundane machine and turn your passive creativity into something worth it, then you would not need to worry about something so little. What you are crafting is going to change how this world operates. No longer will we as a species have to rely on digging through a potentially degrading resource, and instead we can chemically craft one upon success, and then craft something better. He told the speaker, besides, I am paying you money directly from my own pockets to see the success of this project. Pietro may excel in robotics and aura, but your mind is more suited for crafting machines of war and destruction, something which you can channel into this project. And I understand that, but do you honestly think I can complete such a machine in the given timeframe? The male voice asked him. If a prototype can be successfully tested, then we can begin working on a full-scale version, and if you need more money, then I will accommodate you with the funding. Let me remind you that you work for me, and while you do give good intel on that creature you call a mistress and her ongoing schemes, let me remind you that without my help, your intellect will never be seen, and you shall remain not but a shadow of your former colleague. What you are crafting goes far beyond a machine. You are pioneering the future of Remnant, he said with a scowl, a future that when mankind and fauna spread beyond the borders of this world, where we conquer the stars, and our own lives. Just thinking about it excited him. We will not need to bow to the whims of these so-called gods who think they are above us simply because they have lost faith in what they have made. He stated, now, beyond that, your mechanical expertise is exceptional, and the twin blade set you crafted was unlike any other. Aya was improved upon using some of your personal design, and Pietro had created my greatest weapon, and 3 days passed before you returned it to me better than ever. That is why I am coming to you, because Pietro was unwilling to improve upon what was there, unlike you who sees the bigger picture. He stated, are we clear? You see more than just one thing, you see the whole thing. Sigh. Asterisk. Alright already. Quit pulling my leg, damn it. I'll see if the prototype can be built up and running, but I make no promises. If it fails, then I'll try and use a different fueling source. The person told him, and if need be, I'll look into older sources of fuel. He finished. Start with helium and then work your way up the compositions. The better it runs off the source of fuel, the better, unless you already have something. William concluded. Well, from what I have seen thus far has been various promises, but a minor result when I made a compound mixed with mercury. I'll look into it and get back to you. The speaker told him. Until then, William. Be well, Watts. Click. William sighed as he leaned back in his chair and gazed at the ceiling. Why were his associates so whiny about such things? Before he could question anything or even himself further, a knock sounded on his door. William, you need to hurry and pack for the tournament. We need to leave in a couple hours and you still haven't readied yourself, my dear. Mother spoke through the wooden frame. I'm packing, Mother. He called back. Yay, he needed to do that, but he'd been rather busy these past few days. What with improving his own weapons, crafting his armor and all the other fancy gadgets he was paying others to build for him and all that. Huffing to himself, he climbed out of the chair. He went to his closet and begun to rummage through it, pulling out some clothes, a luggage bag, and then putting them away. He paused as he looked at an old outfit he had made for the Halloween party that Mother had thrown a year back and smiled. It was a very kingly and regal thing, so he might as well put it to good use. Throwing it in with the other clothes, he nodded in satisfaction. He then grabbed it and walked towards his door, only to pause. Why am I carrying this? He questioned himself before he summoned a glyph and tossed the bag into the portal. There, that's better. He nodded to himself. Exiting his room, he paused when he saw Weiss standing in the hall with a dull look at him. What? He questioned her. William, are seriously going to be lazy about carrying a bag onto the airship? She asked, rubbing her forehead. Yes. He responded instantly. You never know, he went to say, only his elder sister to wave him off. Who or which mongrel is going to go through your stuff when you aren't looking? Yes, I know. You say it every time we travel. She sighed. Then why do you ask? He questioned her. Because I find reminded of the last time we traveled outside the country. She responded with a mild glare. Which time? He asked with a smirk. The time, in which you murdered the high commanders of the Black Fang. She said loudly. Ah, yes. Good times. That wasn't murder. They challenged me, and they paid for it with their lives, and besides, you would have been dead if I hadn't stepped up, he responded. The White Fang is better without those parasite clinging to their name. Weiss sighed as her memories returned to the day she had watched William fight in a more serious manner, a style of fighting in which she had never before witnessed when he had used his gates to fight two single people. Grim, he would unleash everything, but in this fight he had been cunning and decisive from the very beginning. Another reminder that her brother was more than he appeared. She remembered it all too well. Opening parenthesis. Flashback. William and Weiss were out in vacuo securing some resources for their own futures when they had found themselves under attack, more specifically, Weiss by two individuals. A massive stone cleaver cut through the air, and slammed into the ground, an explosion of debris kicking up in response. That's one. A voice declared happily. As the cloud settled down, another filled the air. It was a voice filled with confidence and hubris. To attack my beloved saber is to attack me. William said in distaste. You mongrels must have a death wish. He spoke as the cloud dissipated. Tell me, what in the name of my grandfather caused you to come to such a fanatical conclusion? He questioned, Weiss now standing behind him from where he had grabbed her and pulled her away from the danger. Weiss drew herself up anxiously. William, stop antagonizing people, we need to run. Worry not, Saber, we will be fine. In fact, you should run along and go find the proper authorities to help deal with this situation. He told her, if anything, they might need a cadaver squad to gather the remains of the two dead. He stated. The only one who is dying today is you, Abomination. A female voice spoke. Looking at his attackers, he noticed both were Faunus, and not your ordinary run-of-the-mill Faunus either. These were Black Fang High Commanders. High Commander Sienna Khan and her half-brother Hercules. I see, so you attacked my dear saber to elicit a response of desperation and anger from myself, but what could you possibly have against me that prompts a direct assault on my person? He questioned them. We don't need a reason, but we both know you do not belong in this world. Hercules said in a deep voice, all that you are, all that you do, is against the natural order. We are here to return all that is back to the way it was, he told William. And by that logic, then you mean to kill yourself upon my death then, do you not, Hercules? He questioned. You were not meant to be born, much like I was, and yet here you stand, saying that I am the aberration to the flow of this reality's timeline. No, you will die, we will live and fulfill our own plans, he stated. Then you have nothing I want to speak of, begone mongrels, while my mercy still remains intact, he said, turning on them, acting as if they were nothing more than bothersome children, which they kinda were. Kill him, Hercules, Sienna commanded. Hercules gave a feral smile that demanded blood. Of course, little sister, he said as he charged forward. William sighed as he turned around and jabbed his fist out, striking the massive lion Faunus in the gut with a powerful straight punch to his gut, causing the hulking figure to hunch over and cough as he slid back. William watched as he held his stomach and coughed up blood. "Oh dear, that looks painful. You might wish to have your wounds tended to before they become a threat to your life," he said simply. "William, stop joking around. We need to get out of here," Weiss said, tugging at his arm. "Saber, I believe I said for you to let me handle this while you went and got the proper help," he said, turning to her. "Do not worry, I'll be fine." He nodded at her, making a shooing motion towards her. "Fine, but if you die, I'll spit on your grave," she told him, and then she ran off. "Humph, as if a mongrel feline could so much as scratch me," he remarked as he looked back as Hercules slowly stood to his feet, shaky but firm. "So, care to try again?" he questioned calmly as he kept his gaze on the two faunus. "Before we begin, I wish to say that I am very glad that I can fight you so quickly," Hercules said as he stabbed his sword into the ground before he fell into a fighting stance. "I do enjoy the occasional bout here and there, but I must ask you why you seemed so eager to battle against me, even knowing what you now do," he questioned. "I will admit that I was a bit surprised, but I am not complaining, and so I suggest that you give this fight your all, as I intend to give you my very best," said William, as he fell into his own fighting stance. "I would have it no other way," replied Hercules with a wicked grin, where he then snarled before he planted a foot, the ground cracking under the pressure of his physical strength, only to shatter when he vanished in a blur of speed and slammed into the slightly stunned William and sent him crashing and rolling away. Planting a hand onto the ground, the cement tore and buckled as he dug a trench through the ground. "I'm going to make you suffer, Schnee," Hercules told him, "and those you hold dear, I will strip you of them one, by force if I must," he stated as he marched forward. "Your family will come to understand the pain we faunus have endured the last century, and then, when you are all but begging me to die, I will continue to show you depravity, and when you are all broken in spirit will you have my permission to finally die." Hercules growled at him. "Then come show me such a depravity." William grinned as he watched Hercules vanish in a powerful blast of speed. Looking up, William was forced to block a drop kick from the massive lion faunus as he brought up both his arms and held his ground while blocking the kick, where he then pushed Hercules away, causing the lion to flip back and land a few feet back. After blocking the kick, William shook his arms around a bit, as they tingled a bit, since Hercules' kick had been quite strong. Soon after, though, Hercules attacked again, where for the next 2 minutes the two teens fought in a fierce hand-to-hand battle, blocking or dodging each other's attacks. William was thankfully able to keep up with Hercules' high speed due to his chakra allowing him to enhance his own physical capabilities, which also had the perk of strengthening his own blows whenever he managed to plant one on the feline's body. In fact, he was actually a good bit faster than Hercules was right now. As the fight continued, William blocked another spinning kick from Hercules with his right arm and then attempted to punch his opponent with other free arm. Hercules of course saw this and fell back to the ground and spun around and did an high-speed leg sweep. William of course avoided this by falling backwards as well and using his right arm to push himself into the air and flipped backwards to that he would land of the ground a few meters away from his adversary with no harm befalling him. Not to be deterred, Hercules followed after William, and attacked with a series of high-speed rapid punches, which William was just able to block. After which he disappeared right before Hercules's eyes in a burst of speed and reappeared to Hercules's right side and performed a spinning back kick. Seeing the attack coming at him from the corner of his eye, Hercules immediately brought his right arm up to block the kick, which proved to be almost as strong as Hercules's own roundhouse. Not letting up on his attacks and in an impressive feat of agility, William was able to push himself off Hercules's arm, and spun himself around Hercules's unguarded left side and delivered a powerful forward midair spin kick, hitting the left side of Hercules's head and sending the massive hulk of a figure flying into the wall of a building, but Hercules was able to recover and flip himself around, before he could hit it. The two rushed at one another, fists drawn back, and hurled twin strikes forward as they crashed into each other with the force of a meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs on Earth, the world breaking and buckling under the force of them smashing into one another. Hercules appeared in a flash of speed and smashed a fist into William's face with a very visible shockwave that planted his face into the dirt. As William rose, Hercules once more went to swing at him. William was quick and dodged around the strike and blocked the next. As he was more experienced fighting, it thus meant that he was much better at hand-to-hand. William was excited. He was being forced to use his chakra to fight. Using that ancient power, he blocked a downward hammer punch from Hercules, then blocked a punch aimed at his gut just as fast. His speed and strength more than enough to keep pace with his adversary, William smashed his fist into Hercules' gut, while at the same time he placed a hand against the faunus' neck in a knife hand form and struck him straight on the sternum with his opposing hand using even more force, another shockwave blasting out as he struck his opponent. Hercules skid across the ground and quickly came to a stop where he looked up to see William standing above him ready to strike him under the hit. He slammed a fist into William's belly that sent him flying back and into a wall of the crumbled building behind him. Hercules appeared in an instant and slammed him into the ground. Raising his fist, he went to strike again, only for the lion to receive a boot to the chest that sent him sliding back. Sienna kicked off the ground, her body glowing as she covered her body in her semblance before she rushed forward at what looked like light speed, covering the large distance between her and her target. She appeared in front of William attempting a powerful light speed roundhouse kick. William watched the kick incoming from the left. He simply raised his left hand, deciding to test a theory. He tugged on his chakra, forcing his powerful nature energy to flow through his limb. Chakra tugged on surrounding molecules of the world, drawing them in to latch onto his skin. His hand grasped Sienna's ankle before the sage tilted his head to the right, allowing a blast of air, a powerful shockwave of energy rushing out from the collision to sail past. William gripped tightly on Sienna's leg as the tiger faunus attempted to pull away. Her eyes widened as her leg was caught. She attempted to remove it, but found she couldn't. As she attempted to free herself, she felt as if her strength dissipating. What is this? I've never experienced such a feeling of powerlessness before. It's almost as if he were sapping my stamina from my body. William smirked as he cocked his right fist back, enhancing it with nature chakra. His fist connected with her jaw as he released the chakra on contact. He released Sienna's leg as the woman was sent sailing through the air, rolling along the walkway from the impact. William wouldn't admit it out loud, but it felt quite good to lay the tiger faunus one in the face. Sienna lay amongst the rubble, jaw throbbing in pain. At the last second, she had used her aura to defend herself from any actual harm, something she was thankful for doing as her jaw hurt like hell. The faunus groaned as she forced herself to her knees. She had no idea how the punk Schnee had managed to hit her or even hurt her without the use of aura, but this just made the man even deadlier. William was too busy paying attention to Sienna. He had in an honest mistake forgotten about Hercules, and if he had been anyone else it would have been a fatal mistake. With his focus on the female faunus, a fist of raw force crashed into the left side of his face. William gave a pain-filled cry as he was tossed through the air. The reborn sage hit the ground, rolling along it as the strike broke his nose and dislocated his jaw. The sage planted his hands in the ground once he came to a stop. He slowly pushed off the ground and began to stand. The entire left side of his face had been mangled, his jaw hanging loosely, and if he was a normal human and not a reincarnation, they would be all sorts of unpleasantness in their future. William's lone eye locked onto Hercules, delivering a menacing glare. Wisps of chakra-like blue tongues of fire flickered to life, folding over one another like string, repairing the damage done to his features within a matter of seconds, to the point it was as if he had never been hurt. It was my mistake for forgetting about you, not something I will do again. I will congratulate you though, as that hurt like hell. William kicked off the ground with such force he formed a hole in the ground. He launched towards Hercules, holding out his right hand. A Rasengan began to form in the open palm, while at the same time nature chakra was added. Two rings of energy formed around the spiraling sphere, much like the rings around a planet, turning it a greenish blue as its user charged in for the kill. William roared as he got in range, the lion fauna snarling in response while he watched the Schnee air charge him as if his little orb would scratch him. Sadly, for all his power and defensive attributes, it would do no good. Sage Art. Rasengan, snarled the silver-haired teen, and with a single push the sphere connected with the middle of the lion fauna's chest. As the sphere connected, the almost impenetrable flesh of Hercules' chest turned black as night. The sphere drilled into the sternum of Hercules, whose reaction was to howl in pain, the raw nature chakra doing its job of pushing past his impressive defense, while the chakra forced through his muscles. William smirked only to catch a glimpse of movement from the corner of his left eye. He quickly flipped back as a crackle of energy struck where he had once stood. William landed a few feet away from Hercules currently stood with his Rasengan still embedded into his flesh, only for the energy sphere to die down, where he scowled. Sienna had come to the rescue. Hercules fell to his knees groaning as he clutched his bleeding chest. The strange sphere had pierced his dense muscular flesh as if it were nothing. What was that thing? How had it hurt him? By the brother gods, it hurt, it really hurt. The pain had been like nothing he had ever experienced, almost like a drill had been trying to carve its way into his chest. He hadn't felt such pain in years. He would make the little bastard pay for that. Hercules roared in anger as he climbed to his feet, energy from his semblance bursting from every pore of his body. I'll kill you, you little bastard. He roared at William. William smirked. There's only one way this ends. Either you submit, or I do. He told the two before he bent his knees and jumped, and in a shocking display, began to glide through the air as if he were granted the ability of flight itself. The ground tearing apart underneath as he flew at the siblings at immense speeds. Hercules narrowed his eyes and began to charge ahead to meet his adversary, chunks of earth breaking apart with each step he made as he sped towards William. The two quickly met up and crashed into one another, and a resounding explosion tore through the air as the sides of the various destroyed buildings crumbled apart in a circular formation caused by the shockwave of their collision. Incredibly, in the midst of their clash, both William and Hercules had slammed into one another not only hard enough to rip the world asunder, but flip over their opponents and have William be sent flying away where Hercules had been knocked back across the ground. Hercules slammed a fist into the ground to stop his movements where he saw William slam into the upper stories of a building, and having recovered before William quickly followed. William crashed through the rooftop and leapt back, ripping a massive spire of steel up from the structure, and as Hercules landed on the rooftop, he felt his eyes widen as he saw William leaping at him, swinging the massive building antennae at him to try and rip his head off. Hercules was given no quarter as William proceeded to smash the steel frame into his face where he was sent crashing into a wall behind him. William huffed as he threw the ruined framework to the ground. I may have grown up in a lavish life, but never think for a second I didn't train to get where I am. I was bred to rule this world. I trained my entire life to master and hone my senses in battle. He explained to Hercules as the man looked at him in a silent and stunned awe. He had never expected William to be strong, a spoiled brat who cried to daddy when he didn't get his way, but he was wrong. He was stronger than he had thought, but never in his wildest dreams did he ever think the kid would be this powerful. And to add insult to the injury, William snarled in contempt, "Where did you train?" "On a farm," he yelled as he lowered himself down, a silver glyph shimmering into existence beneath him as a silver wash of light began to cover the boy. Hercules watched in silence as the boy's clothes began to shimmer and change before his eyes. His tattered rags vanished as his flesh was revealed to him. Crimson crisscrossing tattoos covered his chest, hips, and arms. His body was rippling with untold strength as his muscles clenched in preparation. Suddenly silver armor began to form over his legs, a blue cape wrapping itself around his waist as a single glove of what appeared to be platinum. In reality it was sage chakra enhanced Atlassian steel appeared on his right hand. Standing up as the glyph vanished, William looked down on the growling Hercules, unaware that sage energy was flowing through the air and into his enemy's body. turning his eyes from a dark blue to a blood crimson. Hercules snarled as he leapt at William, and the two of them crashed through the wall behind William and soared through the air. As they did, William smashed a fist into Hercules's face and sent him flying back. William quickly reappeared above his opponent and smashed a foot into Hercules's side and sent him flying away in the opposite direction from the force of the blow before he could recover. As he flew at Hercules, the beast man managed to recover as William tried to hit him again. And soon the two were running quite literally at that circles around one another as they tried to hit their opponent, never hitting but coming very close as they evaded one another each time. William tried to hit Hercules, but ended up moving past him, allowing for Hercules to kick the shiny air away, where he charged at William as fast as he could, and smashed a fist into him once, twice, thrice before William shook his head as he managed to recover from the third blow enough to turn and dash away and through the buildings that surrounded them. Hercules kept a very good pace, but William proved to be extremely elusive as he soon managed to lose Hercules in the surrounding areas and he came to a stop. As he turned around to pull back to search another area, William snarled as he crashed through one of the skyscrapers behind Hercules, catching the ebony-haired man by surprise before William quickly kicked him into the side of one of the adjacent skyscrapers. The air was filled with debris from the crumbling skyscraper side, cement and glass, some steel mixed in as well, raining down towards the ground as the two men collided in a battle that was more akin to vengeful gods fighting. As the debris fell, Hercules rushed out of the obscuring cloud and slammed into William and slammed him into an entirely different building across from them and began to drag his face across the crumbling monolith, the building crumbling apart as he tried to overpower the shiny with his own brute force, only to find out quickly that there was not enough building top to beat the kid down with. Without the building to use to try and subdue William, Hercules was at an extreme disadvantage. While gripping onto William's shoulder, Hercules drew back a fist and attempted to slam it into William's face, but William quickly brought his palm up and caught the clenched fist from Hercules before he swung back, breaking Hercules's hold on him and landed a more powerful uppercut that sent Hercules up into the air, Hercules's body flipping head over foot in the process. However, rather than let Hercules get any further away to recover, William grabbed his enemy's foot and began to spin in a circle, his speed increasing with each second before they were not but a blur. Hercules's voice of panic filled the air as he realized what was to happen, but before he could counter William's next move, he released Hercules and watched as the beast man crashed through a building nearby. And he didn't stop, as even after crashing through the nearby building, Hercules had been spun with enough speed and thrown with enough velocity that he had been sent flying at such speeds that he crashed through not just one, not two or three, not 4 or 5 or even 6, but 7 entire skyscrapers without stop, explosions of steel and cement filling the air and a couple actual explosions of flame accompanied him in doing so. Easily crashing into and through what was probably the 8th or possibly 9th building, Hercules cried out and grunted with each impact before he crashed through the last wall of stone, rolling across the ground beneath him partially dazed and slightly unconscious. He was unable to fight back as William appeared next to him, where he drew a foot up to his chest and coated it in golden energy, where he lashed out and kicked the stunned lion Faunus away, where he crashed through the building and landed next to the stunned Sienna. "We could stop this right now if you two give up. I will gladly leave," spoke William, offering the two a chance to back out now. Hercules was slow to recover from the beating he had been given, but upon hearing the shini's declaration snarled like his animal side and launched himself towards William, showing his answer. Sienna merely sighed at her mad sibling's actions. It was almost as if the man had a death wish. William lifted a hand and held it up in a claw-like fist. "Just remember, I gave you an out." Hercules released a bellowing battle cry as he reared his head back and then proceeded to grab his sword from the ground. How it had ended up there William had no clue, and he proceeded to race forward. Sienna shook her head at the actions of her brother, only to blink as she saw something pierce through Hercules' stomach. The lion Faunus looked down, particles of blood dripping to the ground as a hand covered by a dazzling ebony lighting was pierced through his stomach. He turned his head, finding his attacker, William, standing behind him. Senpo. Reikiri. Kuro Yeba, Sage Art. Lightning Cutter. Black Blade, whispered the teen as the lightning in his hand morphed into a cackling longsword. He slashed through the air, cleaving Hercules in half at the waist, watching as the top half fell to the ground. Sienna bit a lip as she watched as Hercules used his arms to push his upper half off the ground. He brought his severed legs to join on his lower torso, causing it reattach in a sickening sound of blood and bones cracking together as his body regenerated from the grievous wound that could have been fatal if he was anyone else. Sienna thought to herself in shock at how William had defeated her sibling. Sienna gasps when William seemingly appears behind her and leaps out of the way. Trying for a punch, Hercules appears next to William but is once more blocked and then kicked away, his hands gouging up ground as he forces himself to stop. He grunts in surprise as he catches William's fist in his hand, but still, William is just too fast as he launches a punch to his gut, lifting him up off the ground. A hit once again hitting him in the gut raises him higher and another hit strikes him quickly, followed by yet another to his face, lifts him back up before William executes a backflip where he lands a powerful kick to Hercules' chin and hurls him away. The sheer force from the hits William delivered were astronomical, the shockwaves blasting the rubble of the small rocks around them back with each blow landed. Regardless, after executing his kick, Hercules slams into the ground and rolls again and manages to only roll once and quickly gain his footing where he launches himself at William as fast as he can. Hercules launches a punch that William stops with his forearm and then lashes out with a left hook to Hercules' face before the two both throw punches that collide with the other's fist, an explosive waterfall rising into the air as the force of their blows shove them away from one another. With a burst of speed, William raced towards Hercules and landed a quick jab from which Hercules avoided by leaning backwards. William ducked under a left hook, but was caught off guard by a roundhouse kick that he half-blocked with his right arm, the force of the kick sending him across the ground and over the already destroyed landscape. William flung into action again, Hercules easily dodging his punch with a forearm. A left cross hit William across his cheek, followed by a short curt elbow on his chin that made him bleed a little. William staggered a few steps backwards, where he shook his head. As Hercules came at him, William spun around and smashed an elbow into his shoulder before William delivered a punch to his solar plexus, winding him for a bit. With that done, William grabbed Hercules by his head and slammed his face down on a knee several times, breaking the man's nose, leaving large amounts of blood across the ground in which they fought. Gah! Hercules coughed up blood as he rolled across the ground trying to get up, in spite of his injuries. Quickly moving, William struck as he thrusted his hand forward to grasp Hercules by the throat and lift him into the air before snarling, "Yeargh!" as he slammed him down on the ground with world-shaking force. The ground was ripped apart, rocks and dirt filled the air from the sheer force of the slam. But Hercules still retaliated and kicked William in the chest, causing him to slide back. William ducked quickly to avoid a punch before smacking away another fist, returning one of his own. It made contact but didn't stop the two. William threw a straight right which was caught by Hercules before being hit with a strong left hand which sent him flying. However, Hercules wasn't finished as he rushed forward. William barely managed to leap to the right to avoid an energy blast from Hercules' eyes but was caught by a kick to the chest by the man. William grunted as his back hit a large wall of rock which managed to stop him from being sent further. Getting his bearings together, he flew forward and met with Hercules once more, fist impacting against fist to bring forth another explosion of power from their collision. The force alone separated the warring duo as it sent them flying through the air. Upon recovering, William landed and blocked two punches before kicking Hercules in the chest, sending the man stumbling back slightly. Taking a deep breath, he exhaled it all in one breath, releasing a single line of pressurized air. Hercules saw it coming and managed to duck. Had he turned around, he would have seen chunks of one of the nearby being sliced like butter. As he looked up, he noticed the shiny air was missing. Hercules realized too late to look behind him as he felt a sharp pain on his spine. The blonde had hit him with a powerful elbow right in the center of his back. Even with the power he possessed, the hit still hurt like a motherfucker when it made contact. William saw Hercules drop to a knee as a result of the blow to the back and saw it as his best opportunity to end it. The blonde appeared in front of Hercules and delivered a strong enough uppercut to the chin that managed to lift the man into the air. Reappearing, William slammed right fist into Hercules' face and Hercules returned the favor as he slammed his left fist into William's. They stepped back and then both did a high kick which connected with one another and caused an explosion of rock and dust to fill the air as the two slid away from one another. Before William could even think more on the subject, Hercules sneered at him before he disappeared right before William's and Sienna's eyes. The next thing William knew, Hercules appeared right before him, when William tried to defend himself and strike at Hercules. He disappeared and reappeared to William's right and delivered a powerful punch to the side of William's face sending him flying. Before William could even realize what had just happened, Hercules appeared again in midair and gave him a brutal kick to the left side of his face, sending him flying in the opposite direction. After the kick, William tried to recover by getting his feet back on the ground, but as soon as he did, Hercules appeared again and punched him in the stomach. The punch was so strong that William felt like he had been kicked by a donkey and nearly fell to his knees. This continued for the next few minutes, as Hercules flew around William, making the Schnee feel like a ping-pong ball at being sent flying around the area. He couldn't even defend himself as every time he tried, Hercules would hit him before he could put his guard up, and every time he tried to hit Hercules, the faunus would disappear and reappear somewhere else. After receiving yet another powerful kick from Hercules, William struggled to keep himself standing. Shit. How the fuck is his raw strength on par with Tsunade's? How can anyone be so physically strong without chakra? Thought William, as he spat out some blood and pant heavily. But before he could think any further on the matter, Hercules appeared right underneath William and sent a powerful kick to his chin, sending him flying into the air. William of course recovered quickly thanks to his high tolerance for pain from his training and flipped himself over so that he would land on his feet. But as soon as he landed, he saw Hercules appear in front of him, where he tried to hit the boy. But he immediately disappeared and reappeared to William's left, then his right and then behind him, and each time William tried to hit him, he would move away before William could hit him. Before William knew where Hercules went, the lion faunus appeared to his right and sent him a powerful right hook, which sent the young Schnee to the ground and skidding across it to the middle of the empty plaza. As William slowly got back onto his feet, he spat up some more blood and coughed a little. Crap. I knew Hercules was tough, but I never imagined he was this strong. His speed is insane as his build, I just can't keep up with him. I've got no other choice, I have to play my final card. If I don't, I'm going to lose this fight. After seeing that William was back on his feet and seeing the shape he was in, Hercules frowned slightly. Give up, your loss is inevitable, you cannot hope to match my power. There will be no shame in admitting defeat. When William heard this, he just chuckled. Sorry, but giving up is simply not my style. Besides, if you were in my shoes, would you give up? I suppose I would not, the lion faunus admitted. In that we are alike, but regardless, this fight is far from over, stated William, where he then in a surprising act bit into his forearm, a aura of blue-silver energy wrapping round his body where, much to the siblings' shock, his wounds began to vanish before their eyes as they healed. I think I have enjoyed myself quite enough with the holding back. I think it's time that I begin to finally fight the both of you seriously now, he told them. Let's see how you fare when I actually take a fight serious, he hummed aloud. At the same time, he opened a dozen portals behind him, their silver glow shining behind him as he pulled out various treasures held within and quickly launched them at the massive beast. However, much to his surprise, not shock, he was never socked by anyone or anything. The blades simply ricocheted off the flesh of the massive beast's skin, Sienna and Hercules both smirking when they watched this occur. The ground was torn up, but the lion faunus stood firm in his spot as he grinned fairly at the Schnee air. But, rather than scream about what a monster her brother was, Sienna watched as William hummed to himself, and then he raised a hand, withdrawing a more powerful lance from the deeper sects of his gate. Swinging the hand down, he launched it at max speed, and smirked when he watched Hercules swipe his blade through the air, a resounding clash of metal and stone filling his ears as his eyes beheld the truth of the situation. So that's how it is? He questioned curiously, dispersing the gates he had summoned beforehand, only to call upon 24 more. The portals shined silver as they manifested in a new arrangement. Various blades once more were pulled out of the gate as they took aim at the beast before him, and attacked. The steel blades flew through the air and pierced flesh with various sounds of death before the ground was rocked by a small explosion. Squelch, 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 boom. As the dust cleared, Sienna was gazing upon William as he ignored her for the more viable threat in the form of her brother. Do you really think it'd be that simple? Sienna questioned him. My brother is essentially immortal, you'll have to do better than that, she said haughtily. And he hummed as he watched Hercules growl, his body glowing red, his eyes a deep crimson as he gazed at William while rising to his feet. Sigh, I grow weary of my opponents when they simply don't just cut apart or burn. He said in disappointment, but, to be honest, I have never fought against someone who could truly return from the dead. He remarked. Pain used puppets, they didn't count, I see you semblance for what it truly is. Bound to this world and unable to die, but when you do, the afterlife spits you out, forcing you to relive every single second you have lived throughout your life, taken penance in the form of your mentality, thus drawing you deeper into the madness to that of a beast. He said, shocking Sienna. He had perfectly described her elder brother's semblance, God hand, and he had only seen its potential a singular time. How was this even possible? However, William wasn't finished speaking. It is a semblance that I don't possess in my armory, it seems that I am at a disadvantage, he remarked, and then, to Sienna's shock, he raised his hand and called upon even more weapons from his gate. Each one was different than the ones he had used before on her brother. I find this vexing, as only the finest of my weapons would be able to bring this one down. He sighed and then swiped his hand and launched them anew. Cling, clunk, squelch, squelch. Hercules, named for the story of a man who performed 12 labors, after which he was welcomed amongst the gods. William stated, he was adamant and unyielding, the ultimate in perseverance. William said pleasantly, but then his tone changed, my armory, however, is unlimited. He stated seriously, it is the ultimate in offensive force, and is overflowing with ways to kill enemies. He told them as he withdrew various weapons, and as he said each was new for his offense. But even with all the weapons there was a chance he could lose, but William seemed confident in his selection. Stop playing nursemaid, Hercules, each time you die, another labor is complete, he said. And after this, there will be no gods in which to welcome you, he told him softly. My brother can't lose to you. Sienna growled, because he's the strongest in the world. She snarled out as Hercules growled and charged. William shook his head as he launched a wave of his seemingly endless weapons, watching as Hercules swiped and dodged around them, and then, William snorted as several stabbed into the Mont's flesh and pushed him back further, the steel weapons dissolving as he continued his charge. Well then, if that's the way he wanted to do things, then he'd better sever the link to his madness and his own inhibitions. Sienna. Hercules felt his eyes widen when several of the blades swerved around him and swooped in towards the surprised and shocked Sienna, but as she closed her eyes, and heard the sounds of flesh being impaled, she awaited for the darkness, but it never came. She had to check to be sure. Head, lungs, legs, arms, chest, everything was safe, so if she wasn't impaled then. She gasped when she saw her brother standing over her, a dozen blades piercing his body. Your defeat is as certain as the sunrise, William stated seriously, knowing that as long as his opponent fought the way he did, he would inevitably fall in combat without having once reached him. The hulking beast was crouched over the much smaller form of the figure who had nearly brought his beloved saber to the ground in death. William, however, cared not for either of them, only that he was quite enjoying himself in the fight. How about it? You're going to die anyways, so why not just lay down your burden? He questioned. If you stop shielding her, you might have a chance of taking me down, he stated. Sienna looked up past the mass of muscle guarding her in both shock and horror. This freak, no, this monster, was utterly ripping her big brother apart. His semblance was nothing, meant nothing, could be nothing before the strength of this condescending man's overwhelming force. Yes, this man was not human, many of his attacks were innumerable, and the speed in which those attacks came as they were unrelentingly freed from the depths of his so-called gate, was like watching bolts of lightning arc through the sky. That he had already claimed so much of her brother's sanity, any more and he would be gone forever. The blades sticking into the man's flesh shimmered and dissolved into golden dust as the man stood up with a glare, stepping around Sienna to stand in front of her attacker. A growl emerging from his lips as a pulse of raw anger and loathing was released from his throat. William nodded. First see, he stated softly, if that's how you wish things to be, then die alongside her, beast. He declared as he opened over a dozen more portals and began unleashing a nigh unending wave of weapons from his gate. Cling, clang, squelch, clunk, clank, clunk, squelch, squelch. The massive man fought with all he had, swinging and blocking all that came before him, steel ripping through his flesh as he defended against the onslaught. His charge to try and rush ahead stopped in its tracks as he was forced to plant a foot and take the defensive, the ground ripping itself apart in the conflict between what amounted to a fight between gods. Eyes widened when he watched the portals vanish and light up behind his sister, the massive man dashing with all the speed he could muster to her sides and back to protect her. The ground suffered, blood flew, and steel clashed relentlessly, and yet it wasn't enough. In an effort to protect her, he died 3 times in less than 30 seconds, and even now Sienna could see the struggle her brother was going through, knowing what was coming now that he had reached the end of the ropes. Please don't lose. Brother. The young faunus woman screamed out, her hand clutched to her chest in desperation. RRAAAAARRRRGGGHHH. The lion faunus roared, the heavens trembled and the earth shook under the might of the feral beast's call. A roar which would normally send any who heard it running for the hills was enough to rattle the world. William, however, was anything but frightened by the call of this mangy cat calling itself a king of beasts, seeing as he was more eager than anything to continue to test himself against such a foe. The Schnee heir felt his grin widen, his blood boiling in excitement. So be it, beast. He responded eagerly as he opened an impenetrable wall of glowing portals above him. I'll give you the greatest of labors, he declared as he unleashed his gate upon the faunus. Triple the amount of portals opened and unleashed their wrath upon the feral creature. Cling, clunk, squelch, clank, ca lunk, squelch. And that makes 11. William spoke earnestly, watching the blade pierce into the man's skull, his enemy now all but beaten. You're on the ropes now, aren't you? Hercules, he demanded as the lion faunus roared once more as the blades piercing his flesh dissolved away once again. With the last of his power, the massive brute charged ahead, only for a wave of blades to stab down into him from behind, pinning him to the ground in an explosion of dust and stone that hid him from sight. William sighed as he dismissed his gate, the portals dissolving into the air. Had you just forsaken her right away, you might actually have stood a chance, he remarked. In the end, he was no more than some lowly beast who lived to fight. He sighed in disappointment. I had hoped better for someone of his caliber, he said as he approached the fading dust cloud. I had not taken him to be such a fool, he commented calmly as he stopped, finding the massive man on his hands and knees in the bottom of a crater. No less than a dozen blades piercing his body, his hand gripping the massive battle axe he had used to challenge him gripped in one of his hands. He was a worthy opponent for many of his more valued treasures, but nothing so grand as Aya sadly. A growl filled the air, drawing William's attention down where he glimpsed red eyes. He blinked in mild surprise as the brute roared once again, bolting to his feet, swinging down with all he had. But, even now William was less than surprised as he watched the full series of events unfold in the blink of an eye. Hercules went to swing, but in a strange sense of rationality, he jumped back just in time to avoid being skewered. Emerald watched in shock and fear. "Brother, no!" she cried out as she watched chains of golden energy race through the air, surrounding the brute of an animal. As he was airborne, the massive figure had no way to dodge the net of chains around him. One of the chains grabbed his weapon and tore it from his grasp before he could blink. Another wrapped around his neck and yanked back, slamming him down into the ground in an explosion of dust and stone. And then they piled one, filling the air and wrapping around the hulking figure's body. The sheer amount of chains binding him would rip any other apart. The chain around his neck was doubled upon, one pulling up from behind, another wrenching down towards the ground to pin his neck in place. There were 4 chains around his waist, 2 at his sides and 1 in the front and back. Each chain pulled taut to the point he would not be able to move in any direction. 4 chains bound his arms as they wrapped themselves tightly around his massive bulk and pulled in opposing directions. His legs were also bound up with twin chains to ensure he would never advance. A full and complete immobilization in every sense of the word. "Get out of there, brother!" the young woman cried. "Goo-ha!" the brute grunted, but couldn't so much as budge the chains binding him. "Why, you are strong, so you should be able to," Sienna went to say only for William to interrupt her. "Quiet, little girl," he commanded her. The adamantine sealing chains, even a god bound in these chains could not escape their cold embrace. He said seriously, "The more powerful their captive, the tighter the chains will." He told her, "As if I would ever allow one who attacks my saber to ever escape from my judgment." He snarled as he opened a portal above his head and pulled out a massive cleaver and flung it at the man, removing head from body, watching as the body fell to its knees and blood flowed freely. "Brother, no!" Sienna exclaimed in terror. "And now for you." William spoke, drawing Sienna's terrified eyes to him, watching the shiny air as he walked forward with the utmost confidence in himself. "Now then, how should I kill you?" he questioned himself as she began to shake. "My gait is not worthy enough to be tainted by such a feeble foe, so I find myself in a quandary," he stated. "Should I use my Rasengan, to return the arts long since forgotten by this world, maybe break your neck by settling on a clone for a weak peon such as yourself? Or would a Rasenshuriken do the job for me when it destroys all that you are on a molecular level?" So many choices, so many ideas that are running through my mind that I couldn't possibly decide, he questioned giddily. "No. Please, no." Sienna pleaded. "Mercy, I beg of you." She all but cried. He then hummed. "Mercy, how interesting." He thought to himself, "In fact, it's grand idea. But, before you go off and spread tale of how you and your brother were soundly beaten both in death and to submission, you tell all your cronies that if I so much as even see a hide or hair of the fang, then all bets are off. There will not be a single survivor of your little organization, because I will hunt each and every cell within your little group's association down, and kill them all." He said darkly before he perked up. "You know, I have a better idea, aside from the fact that I'll let you live and say those exact words," he said before leaning down to look at the shaking Faunus in the eyes. "Tell yourself this from here on forward, no matter how far you run, no matter how much you try to hide, I will find you and I will kill you. Understand?" he questioned as she shakily got to her feet. "1,000 pardons for disturbing your night." Sienna bowed gratefully. "I don't want your apologies, I want your word," he told her. You have it. I swear to all the gods, both the old and the new," she promised. "That's good. Very wise decision." He nodded. What are you?" Sienna questioned softly. "I am William Schnee, of Atlas, and first am burdened with glorious purpose," he said deeply before he spoke normally. "Now then, why don't you run along, little mouse?" He ushered her away with a motion of his hands. "I believe I am about to have company," he said as Sienna gasped, Asnod rushing away. leaving the massive figure of her brother behind, but swearing to herself to get revenge on the murderer of her brother even if she had to make a deal with the devil himself in order to do so. She just wouldn't realize what devil she made a deal with, and even then it was already too late. William had sensed her intentions from the start. Better do something about her before she got too far. Shouldn't he? Meh. He'd be fine. He would find Kurama and they'd handle the world and all its challenges when they were thrown at them in their given time. Opening parenthesis. End flashback. One time, and it was only a single person who died, multiple times might I say. He told his twin, I let the other one go at least. Yay, a criminal. Weiss responded. Why so angry? We got one of them at least. He shrugged. Because, you only managed to get one of them, and not the other. Weiss responded before she shook her head. Regardless, we got to go, time now. Mother is growing impatient about you taking your time up here, she told him. Well, best not keep her waiting, he said happily. 0.0.0.0. You failed. Salem, please, Sienna yelped as a hand slapped across her face, a handprint glowing from the force of the blow. You have failed me, child. The ash-colored woman sneered down at her pawn. You had told me that he could only open up a few portals and sling a few minorly powerful weapons around. We were supposed to capture this boy and bring him into the fold of our plans, and yet what does he do? The woman demanded. He eradicates a horde of my most powerful Grimm like they are nothing. 50,000 of those Grimm were designed by my hand to be the strongest of alphas, and they are all ripped apart by an endless barrage of cannon fire. She snarled. You said he would be a good addition to our cause, and yet we couldn't stop his defiance upon those walls. Dozens were killed in the battle, but we didn't even get so much as a single Grimm to touch him in the fighting before it was settled. Easy pickings, I was told by the both you and James, and yet here first am without so much as a single Grimm or boy whose semblance could tip the balance into my favor. The maidens are hidden from me, and the relics are out of my reach. The woman stated. Tell me, child, where do you think you went wrong? She questioned Sienna. I was misinformed about the prowess he had with his semblance. Sienna said as she bowed her head further. I had thought his limitations were minimal and that with the vast size of the horde, the city would be wiped out and the boy could be captured and brought before you. Humph, the white-skinned woman snorted. Indeed you were. When you came to me declaring your desire to avenge your brother, you pointed out the altered symbolic powers that brought what was essentially an immortal man who could only die a specific way a single time with each death and intrigued me. Now, I find out he has the power to stand against the largest Grimm horde to have been recorded in history with meager cannons. She sneered, and then, he does another impossible feat, he rips the continent in half, further splitting up my horde, crushing a majority of it with a solitary blow of an unknown weapon that I have never before seen in the eons of my existence. And to top it off this, he is also capable of using these same glyphs to summon hundreds upon thousands of weapons to battle without moving so much as an inch from where he stood. She yelled out, You promised me a powerful weapon, and all I have to show is the loss of countless Grimm to your folly. Ironwood swore to keep the military at bay, to allow the slaughter of Mantle, so that we could move forward with our plans. Once we had acquired the power of a maiden, we were going to have access to the vault of creation, and now look, it is beyond our reach. My lady, Sienna made to protest, only for a withering glare to cast her into silence. James was court-martialed, and is slated for execution for his inaction, and those peons look to this schnee boy as if he were some kind of god. Surely we can do something to bring him into your grasp, milady? A deep male voice questioned. Unfortunately, Heracles, you were barely resurrected with the full might of your semblance intact. The woman sighed towards the twisted shadow. I have enhanced your powers, but there is only so much my magic can grant, even one as formidable as you. The large man rumbled. The number of lives I have obtained has more than doubled. Surely my power combined with that of your magic could crush him. No, you are to be our hidden ace. The pale woman shook her head. if we cannot strike him at full power, we will strike him where he is weakest, we will bend him to our will. Sienna hummed, warming to the idea. Well, from what I know of him specifically, he seems to have only one weakness, but it's a glaring one. And that is all we need. Her dark mistress answered, tell me, where is the chink in this boy's armor, what makes him tick? All men had weaknesses. She would find his. And then she would squeeze. William grinned, how intriguing, for someone such as yourself to match me blow for blow when I am hardly fighting serious. Very well then, I shall grant you the privilege of this blade's hidden power. He told her as he grasped the hilt in both hands, awaken, sword of end, Enki. He commanded as a pillar of dazzling blue light erupted and filled the air, the arena shaking from its presence alone as the blade was filled with unfathomable powers. I see you actually are serious for a change, the lance user said eagerly, and if that is the case, then I too shall give you a taste of your own medicine. She spoke up eagerly as she prepared herself. Having taken the twin sword's other half away from the silver-haired teen, she could feel the innate power it possessed, and as such, she twisted the handle on the golden blade, a pillar of blazing red energy sparked before exploding off and streaking through the heavens. Rocks and dust shifted and rose into the air as they gazed upon one another from their positions, get ready to lose Schnee. Pyrrha said boldly. Come at me, Lancer. He declared with a smirk of challenge, his own blade swinging down in challenge as they struck, a pillar of twisting crimson azure shooting up into the sky as the explosion enveloped the both of them in a shimmering dome of raw power. So we meet again. I admit, I had my doubts. Ha, of course you would. Not me. I never doubted for a moment. The world rippled. That was the best way, the only way Weiss felt, to describe what followed. Her brother held a hand toward the sky. A glyph bloomed above his hand, shimmering just above his fingertips. Then another. Another. Yet another still. As she looked on, he reached into it. Let me show you just what exactly real power is, in the hands of someone who controls it. And heaven answered. Laughter split the air. Not so brave now, are you, mongrels? Grimm died in droves, fleeing for their lives. Explosions filled the air, steel flashed as it hurtled through the space between. Weiss palmed her face. There's no stopping him when he's like this. William stood on the precipice of the academy. He looked out over the emerald forest, a slight look of disgust on his face. To think they would dare to have him try to commit to such a childish game on the morrow to simply see if he was worthy to join their ranks, what fools. And it was to begin in 3 days no less. With timing so perfect that it must have been brought about by the machinations of fate, rather than chance. The earth cried out, oh underscore. Underscore. Underscore underscore. Quote quote exclamation mark question mark quote quote. Ruby and her fellow beacon candidates looked across the emerald forest, all turned to look at the sky. They had heard a mighty roar off in the distance, one with the power to shake both heaven and earth. But it was too beautiful to be called a roar. It was as though a giant angel or its ilk, or perhaps even the earth itself, was singing a lullaby. They could tell that the sound had come from far, far away from the forests that lay to the west of Beacon. That tremendous rumbling noise, which laid waste to the very laws of physics, was, for some reason, something they each had faith in. It was like the first cry of a newborn, and at the same time, not. It was almost certainly the voice of a stupendously powerful being. As she followed the lavishly armored teen, Ruby gave a pause as the hairs on the back of her neck rose, a deep otherworldly cry filling the air as it washed over both her and William, both experiencing different effects of the energy as it resonated in the duo. Ruby shook in awe as the power flowed across the world, through her body, and by feel of it alone, there was none who could match it. This presence, it's enormous. What is this energy? She hyperventilated in shock. However, it was much different for the Schnee heir as he stopped with wide, shocked eyes. William stood motionless upon hearing that voice. He had been about to summon something to his hand, when he stopped, and it was then that the one deemed king displayed a powerful emotion for the first time. Even those who had known William friend and family alike would say that it was rare to see him so emotional. That king among all kings was quick to anger, and by no means level-headed, but to think that even he could be brought to this state. That voice, could it be? His eyes lit up with surprise, consternation, bewilderment, and then, exhilaration. Quote. Is it really you? He is a dignified young man with silver hair standing up like a blazing white flame. His face is more than the mere word handsome can describe, as it is almost angelic. His eyes are blue like the heavens, and are visibly not those of a human, and give off a mysterious radiance that makes people wither. He has a perfect, golden proportioned body, described as emanating majesty that makes flames surrounding him afraid to come close, and his very soul glows gold like the midday sun. He presents himself with a suit of silver platinum armor consisting of 2 sections that gleam like spun moonlight and shines brighter than a diamond. The first part, a lower plate which covers his stomach. On top of that lies another plate which hangs from the neck and goes to the midsection, constructed of scaled platinum with the design of a gold dragon on the chest, the upper body coiling around while the lower portion of the body coiled down on his stomach to his back. Extending over this plate are 4 round, metallic extensions which attach underneath the plate around the neck. Around each shoulder are very large shoulder pauldrons. The 2 shoulder guards had the heads of dragons carved into them from pure gold, while he had his waist covered with the tail of the dragon covering them. The armor features gleaming gauntlets bearing the scaled pattern of the rest of the armor, with the sections becoming smaller as the gauntlets move in towards his hands. The platinum silver armor complete with a azure waist cape. By removing his armor, he exposes the red tattoos that he bears when using his full power. In addition, he wears a platinum necklace and has silver earrings. Ruby watched in silence as William's powerful aura wavered for a mere instant as he whispered those words. But, without a moment's hesitation, he exuded arrogance once again, overbearing as always. He burst into a fit of earnest laughter. The sound of his jubilant voice penetrated the vast sky, higher and ever higher. And then, after he had had his fill of laughter, ha! What marvelous fortune! What am I to call a happenstance of this sort if not proof of my kingship? He swelled with delight and vigor, as though he had not been bored just a few moments earlier. Rejoice, mongrel girl. It seems that I have been granted a fortuitous occasion to use the full force of my abilities in this little game after all. He said in a more pleased tone as he spoke, there should be no need to stand on ceremony. A grand reunion is about to take place, and it shall be one the likes of which has not been celebrated in all of history, he told Ruby. William was uncharacteristically talkative, perhaps because he was awash in joy. What a pleasure it would be to end it all in a duel on yonder plaza. But then again, if he has been summoned as a mad warrior, or if... No, I shall not speak of it. This is not a matter that the mongrels ought to hear of. He was in a pleasant mood, unable to stifle his laughter, as kingly as ever. As he stared in the direction from which the roar came, he spoke to his dear little assassin, who still knelt beside him. Look upon me, Ruby. Shocked that the Schnee heir would refer to her by name, she raised her head to look up at him. Before I go, I believe I have need to part some advice for you to take heed of. As you are a child, you should live your life as one. Only when you obtain true knowledge of who you are and what you can accomplish may you take your place among those who have etched their names into the annals of history, he told her as he kept his gaze towards the distance. Why, yes. Yes, of course. Her eyes were wide with surprise. He glanced her briefly before he continued. He stood up straighter than he had ever before as he said, majestically, until such a time comes that you learn the ways of the world, it will suffice for you to gaze upon my might with jubilance. Though he paid little attention to her, he was in high spirits as he delivered his kingly order. Though there was a touch of sarcasm in his words, they were nonetheless powerful. Ruby shakily nodded. Why yes, of course, she said to him. She could do nothing but display her utmost respect to him. She was unable to jubilate, and so hung her head. I shall attempt to do so. she said, apologetically. And so, with that, a unruly king had stepped onto the battlefield. When Ruby lowered her head at William's words, it happened. Quote exclamation mark question mark quote. An enormous flow of strange, mystic energy blanketed the surrounding space and converged at a point beside her. Ha! It was more than just energy. The purest and most magical element she had ever felt in her life. No, it almost felt like it had a divine aura to it, coalesced in the Schnee's right hand, and something otherworldly fell into his grasp as it fully materialized in the form of a dagger. But the object had too bizarre a silhouette to be called a simple dagger. It looked very similar to a cross between a key, sword. She murmured without thinking. William haughtily replied, "Do not speak of this in the same terms as some mere door key in the hands of some mongrel clown who seeks entry to a meager room," he told her. Grasping the key sword, William turned its tip skyward as he spoke, "Babaloo. Awaken from thine eternal rest," he commanded, and suddenly, the base of the key shifted dozens of times in an instant as he held it in his grasp. She gasped once more as the sheer purity of this object washed over her, outshining anything that the unknown presence had done. As Ruby got a feel for this strange item in his hand, she shivered. The energy coming off this seemingly strange-shaped item was the strongest and purest form of energy she had ever felt. "Ruby, hear this and comprehend my words," he told her. "This is my soul, manifested into the physical plane and bound into contract by myself, given physical form." His tone seemed bored, but his expression contained a hint of joy. "Pay attention, assassin. And show me your proof." Quote. Question mark quote. Before Ruby, whose head was bowed, it opened. A pulse of energy suddenly pulsating from the strange key. Various pieces on the base shifted in such a manner she couldn't comprehend. Swiftly and delicately she watched the small pieces move about in seemingly random directions. Then, she watched in shock as a massive pillar of crimson energy shoot into the air, twisting and transforming into a massive labyrinth of lines she couldn't even remotely comprehend as he gripped the base of the constantly changing item. The blood-red labyrinth-like red patterns can be seen covering the sky from a great distance away from the highest floor of the Beacon Academy all the way to the shores of the Atlas, a signal that something was about to go down without anyone being able to do anything about it. The energy flowing from the key sword surged into all of the space around it, and opened a portal in the world itself. William's voice broke her from her stupor. "You should leave while you still can, because what happens next will rewrite your previous conceptions of anything and everything you have ever imagined," he told her. Various spectating students and staff of the academy were sent into a clamor, but the voices of the crowd, which amounted to hundreds of people, were silenced by the trembling of space. The dimensions themselves seemed to be shaking, and only William's voice clearly reached Ruby's ears. "Assassin, now is the time to prove to me, should the aftermath of this child's play overwhelm you, know that you are unworthy of calling yourself my subject, for my subjects should never be shocked by a mere children's game. You must show me that you are worthy of being among those who are considered beyond mankind's limitations," he told her. "Upon witnessing this confrontation, if you buckle and break, I will not hesitate to send you off with nothing to show for it," he told her, and the light finally apexes as the energy conjures up a golden sphere that vanishes in a dazzling sparkle of lights that dissipate seconds after he returns the key to his vault, pulling this orb of divine light down. Everyone who was able to watched as a small dot of light beginning to get lower and lower into the air, the various crimson lines vanishing as it draws towards the ground, many looking on in wonder of what was occurring. The distortion in space converged on a single point as it reaches the Schnee air. As William reaches his hand into the orb of seemingly divine light, the armored teen grasps something within and he pulls his hand out, and the very air itself is cracked apart as he pulls out a strange weapon that made Ruby Rose's very being cry out in terror, commanding her all but to flee from this man as he blankly looked at her, telling her by his body language alone that the big boys were about to play, and she'd be nothing more than a nuisance to him and whoever he had called this thing for. A single sword emerged from the distortion in front of William. It was nothing like the earlier key sword, but it was certainly no normal weapon. The sword had a strangely shaped blade, if it could be called a blade regardless. As if enjoying himself, William spoke directly to the sword as he looks upon his weapon of choice in eager excitement. 1,000 apologies, Aya, for having disturbed your slumber, but it seems I require your company for this banquet, he said as he pushed his chakra into the weapon, crimson lines igniting as he did so, its power washing over the school in an instant. Ruby gulped nervously. Just what was this thing he called upon? Fret not, you shan't be bored, for I shall soon provide you with a feast, one which you will not soon forget. He cooed to the unworldly weapon, no one will forget. He calls out excitedly. An instant later, the Schnee air had moved, taking a stride filled with unconcealable jubilation. William's figure suddenly vanished from sight. Well, you certainly don't lack for confidence. Cardin gulped. What the hell are you? I am the solution. Now, what was that you said behind my back? I believe you laughed at me. He spread his arms. The emerald forest went still. But you're not laughing now. She frowned at him for a long moment. What are you? Many things. He sipped at the flute of wine languidly. A dead man. A brother. A leader. And also. He raised his gaze. Blue eyes shimmered red. An executioner. You can't just be strong. You have to be smart. You can't just be deserving, you have be worthy. And you aren't. None of you are. He whirled and thrust a finger behind him. Only she is. With the world so set on tearing itself apart, it doesn't seem like such a bad thing to me to wanna put a little bit of it back together. Kurama grunted as he heard heavy-paced footsteps, calling on his chakra as he placed a glowing hand on the ground, but he sighed in relief when he saw who it was that was running at him. Hey, easy. Naruto whispered out. Kurama grunted as he waved a hand at him. Get in here. The Grimm are sniffing around everywhere. He told him. Naruto didn't hesitate to leap into the hole with Kurama and Ren, who groaned as he forced himself to move out of the way. Kurama groaned as he eased out of the way. Son of bitch, you're nothing but a shitload of surprises, aren't you, brat? He questioned only to grunt when the man ripped off some of his sleeve and tied it around his gushing leg wound. Want some pain meds? Naruto asked, holding out his hand to take what appeared to be morphine from his gate. Hell yes, that or your sword of rupture. Kurama responded as Naruto tightened the wrapping. You got any more blades? He questioned through heavy breaths. No. Gate's been empty for a week now. Nothing left inside of it to call upon. Naruto responded as he passed the bottle to the Faunus, who held it over his mouth and crushed it, allowing the contents to flow into his mouth for direct consummation. Kurama dropped his hand and flicked his wrist to rid the glass from his grip. Well shit, you want me to make you some? The Faunus asked him. Save your chakra, old friend, I'm gonna get you out of here. He said before looking to the wounded Li Ren, inspecting the leg wrap and ensured it was tight enough. When it was to his satisfaction he looked up. Let me see, turn your head. He told the teen, and inspecting a large gash across his jawline, it looks much worse than it is. Girls will still wanna kiss ya. He joked, causing Ren to chuckle. He rubbed some ointment from his gate into the wound to ensure it wasn't gonna get infected. Hey, you okay here for a while? He asked. Kurama nodded. Yay, I still have some chakra left in me to fight if need be. He told him. Get him out of here. He said, motioning to Ren, get him to Nora. They've got to be together when that baby's born. Naruto nodded. I'll be back, I'm coming back. He swore as Kurama nodded. Naruto looked to Ren. You ready? He asked as the teen nodded, showing that he was. With some effort, Naruto slung him over his shoulders and ran as fast he could to the cliff where the others were waiting. Kurama watched in silence as Naruto disappeared from sight. Even though he had changed into a overly prideful punk, the old Naruto still remained. The Naruto that always swore to help save and protect those dear to him. He'd shown more of the old Naruto recently than ever before, Given no choice now that one of the four kingdoms was in a full-scale war with the Grimm now having overrun one of the larger populations with there being only a handful to fight back. It felt good to the old fox to see his friend revert even if only for a few days back into his old self. Damn, he needed to focus, there was no time to reminisce. Wane was lashing out with his sword, bashing some of them back with the shield in hand as he tried his best at keeping several Ursa back at bay. Ren and Nora were both cutting down Beowulf Grimm by the dozens as they protected their fellow initiates from harm. Weiss was struggling to sit up from the series of hits dealt to her by Ursa Major Alpha, and it was starting to look hopeless. They were near the school, and they had yet to make a significant impact on the massive wyvern in any way, shape, or form. Yang grunted as she crashed to the ground, and then pushed herself up and cradled her arm. The way this is going, we'll all be dead, she gasped in exhaustion, blood flowing down her forehead. The Grimm surrounded them, their growls and snarls filled the air, and an air of dread seeped into their souls. It was looking hopeless, and without William, they would most certainly lose. However, the Grimm around them were unprepared when a pair of swords shot down from the skies above. Two swords planted themselves into the skulls of two Beowulf and one of the Ursas where they collapsed to the ground. The beacon hopefuls all gasped as they witnessed the attack kill several more of the Grimm. And then, a raining salvo came crashing down upon the ground, forcing the remaining Grimm around them to run away, dozens of golden swords impaling the ground with a sound akin to a machine gun. Why do you all have such long faces? A familiar voice called out, demanding to be heard by all below, drawing their gazes up. They couldn't help but gasp. Weiss nearly began crying, but the fact she was so happy to see this figure made this so much better. Ruby had an extremely happy look as did Yang and Blake. The figure above was definitely a sight for sore eyes. Wane, Pyrrha, Ren and Nora felt the weight that had once rested upon their shoulders lift off. Finally, he had made it. Standing above with no less than 30 discs of silver energy prepared and ready to unleash anything behind him, and his incredible and immense aura washing over the area, was the one person they had thought missing or dead from the wyvern. Said Omega-class Alpha gave a roar and the newcomer narrowed his eyes before snorting as he unleashed a veritable rain of swords down upon the massive draconian Grimm, causing it to cry out in agony as hundreds of blades were impaled into its flesh, the weapons vanishing into golden dust seconds after, only for 1,000 more to stab into the creature's flesh once more. No part of the monster was spared his wrath as the monstrous Grimm was stabbed with what amounted to an entire kingdom's armory. The ground was ripped apart as the dragon slid further back down the wall, a rain of dust and stone filling the air around it. All of his treasures were ready, firing upon the creature who had done so much damage to his newfound companions. They weren't friends, they would not ever be granted such a prestigious title aside from him. The Grimm cried out in pain, letting go of the wall it was climbing and wailing as it was shoved back dozens of feet in an instant, the vast collection of weapons continuing to rain down upon it at the speed of lightning itself. The newcomer smiled in glory, and his visage revealed that it was none other than, "I will help you out. I am ruler of the Atlassian continent, William, King of Atlas and Savior of Mantle." He declared his identity. "You were making such a racket I had to come and see what it was about." He told them as they took in the sight of how he had already crossed his arms over his chest, a familiar yet wide grin on his face. "William," Weiss called out happily. "Did you do something with your hair? You look different." Yang noticed. Which was true, he wasn't in the outfit he had been wearing when they had been on the top of the academy. He was currently wearing no clothes on his upper body, revealing that while he was bleeding somewhat, he had crimson crisscrossing tattoos across his arms and sides. He also had changed from his suit of white to where he now had silver platinum armor on his legs with a bright blue cape attached to it, and he only had one hand covered in a silver glove. And for some reason, the color of his eyes had changed. Where they were at one point a astonishing blue that would make any maiden smitten, now they bled red with power, and his silver hair was as wild as ever as it spiked upwards and partially towards the back, and hanging from his ears were two glistening silver earrings. A screeching sound filled the air, causing William to narrow his eyes briefly, and before she could blink, something flashed in front of her as a piercing sound filled her ears. When she blinked, Blake immediately noticed that there was an arrowhead millimeters from her eyes, the arrow tip connected to a shaft that was stopped by a steel wall of metal, a shield she realized that had appeared from thin air before she could blink. William narrowed his eyes menacingly. So you're the bastard that launched the surprise attack on Weiss? He stated. I assume that you have no intention of begging for your life? He questioned. He hopped off his golden airship, landing softly as he slowly approached this foe who remained shrouded from his gaze. Do you have any last words? He demanded. Blake shuddered. This wasn't an ordinary opponent, he was a Faunus, what with that massive lion mane on his head, his face covered by a large cloth that hid everything except his eyes in mystery. Unsurprisingly, the attacker pulled out another arrow, the coloration somewhat familiar to William, and then he nocked it. A blast of air shot out as the arrow was fired at speeds Blake couldn't track with her enhanced sight, but in a shocking move, a hand reached out and plucked it from the air while holding it away from his face. You'll have to do better than that, mongrel. My sister might be weaker, but even she is faster than this, he told him. Another arrow was nocked and then fired, this time curving around, a metal wall appearing behind William as it intercepted the blindingly quick attack. I see, if you choose to be that obsessed with victory, then that would be the correct choice, he remarked to his silent opponent. Silver discs of light blossomed into being behind him. In that case, I might just do the same myself, he stated seriously. However, such acts are permissible only because that is who I am, he proclaimed as he narrowed his eyes. They are not for the likes of you, he declared. His attacker stood still as dozens of blades began protruding from the discs of silver light, and then shot at the man at lightning speed. William watched in silence as the mongrel began blocking and dodging his attacks with extreme efficiency, causing him to blink in curiosity. What's this, a worthy opponent? He questioned silently. Better to be safe than sorry. The blades he had unleashed were scattered around the dock, the mont's massive bow held above head as he gazed down towards the dirt. Lowering the bow, the intruder held a hand out towards him, beckoning him to try again after the failed attempt. William hummed pleasantly. First, see, you are considerably light-fingered. If that is the case, then how about this? He muttered silently as he opened 3 times the number of portals, numbering now in the hundreds, blades flying through the air in rapid succession. An explosion rocked the docking area, dust and fire filled the air, steel continuing to rain down upon the mongrel trash that attacked him. William kept his eyes narrowed. He hadn't heard the sounds of flesh being pierced by steel. The crashing explosions may mute sound to such a thing, but his unique abilities granted him access to some of the more older ones from his past life, and he wasn't so illiterate as to not channel chakra to his ears to listen for such a sign that showed the battle had come to an end. Blake watched with wide eyes and dropped jaw as the barrage seemed to never end. Smoke and flame fogged the air. Surely that would be the end of it, so why did he persist in continuing the assault? William watched in silence as he kept his offense going, thousands of blades shooting into the densely filled air. Blake's hand came down on his shoulder. William, he's all ready, she went to say, only for William to speak up. Silence, he commanded as he pushed more of his treasures out of his gate, louder explosions filling the air as he kept the attack going. Grunting in annoyance, he stopped the assault, the smoke and dust filling the air slowly fading away to reveal a sight that annoyed William, but frightened Blake beyond words. No. It can't be. Blake couldn't understand. There was no way anyone should have been able to withstand such a barrage of that many swords and come out unscratched, so why had he? William gazed upon his shrouded opponent, the air finally clearing up as they gazed upon one another from their positions. Around the attacker, littering the ground for 100 feet, were the thousands of blades that William had unleashed with unwavering fury. The man who had attacked was unscratched, and stood resolute before him. Suddenly, laughter filled the air, but it wasn't from William. So, this is the power she granted me when she brought me back. He questioned as he looked at his flesh curiously. I'll admit, she does great work, and I'll definitely owe her for the upgrades she provided me, the unknown person remarked as William narrowed his eyes. That voice, why did it sound so familiar to him? And what exactly is so amusing? He demanded as his voice, while calm, was filled with annoyance. Savior of Mantle and King of Atlas, that's what you call yourself? The intruder questioned. I see no king, only a boy trying to prove himself a man. The attacker sneered at him. How incredibly disappointing. He growled out now as his demeanor changed from humored to angered. Blake was now shaking in horror. This man was a monster. You throw weapons at random, but now it's better to say you're throwing sand at me. He told William, a real weakling, or a mindless beast would be brought down by child's play in a manner such as this. He told the Schnee heir. Ho? William questioned. How curious. Blake felt her body stiffen as her head turned so quick one would have thought she'd broken it. His eyes filled with unquestionable fear as she looked at the eager-looking William as he looked at the one calling himself his opponent. Was this curiosity? She could only wonder. She turned back to the attacker and asked herself, just who in the world was this man? Draw that weapon that is deep inside your little closet. Show me the true power of the man who stood against my mistress so callously and readily. He commanded him, then we'll be equal. He growled as he motioned for William to try again. Aya is my alter ego. Naturally, it is not a sword that is meant to be used on such a weakling as you. William responded, isn't that right, beast? He grinned at the man as a blade shot out and ripped the hood from the Mont's face, revealing the formerly deceased brother of Sienna Khan, Hercules Khan, but I will honor you with a sword particularly made for opponents such as you. He said as he pulled out a crimson sword that was enshrouded by obsidian energy, Merdok, origin of selection. He commanded as he grasped it, prove to me that you are mighty enough for me to behold Aya, and I might just grant you such a privilege, he told Hercules. First previous 6 of 6. Review. Jump. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, Chapter 4, Chapter 5, Chapter 6. Share. Email. Facebook. Twitter. Story. Follow favorite author. Follow favorite contrast. Dark. Light. Font. Small. Medium. Large. XL. Twitter. Help. Sign up. Cookies. Privacy. Terms of service.